Faites l'appel, Monsieur le greffier, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Sénateur Gorst, Monsieur le Sénateur Farnham,
Présent.
Madame le Sénateur Ferguson, Monsieur le Sénateur Lafondre, Madame le Sénateur Valois, Madame le Sénateur Moore,
Present.
Monsieur le Sénateur Pallet, Monsieur le Sénateur Mezek, Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier, Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément,
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent,
Present.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sever, Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brelade, Monsieur le Connétable de Gruyère,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Sainte-Marie,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen,
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Martin, Madame le Deputy Martin,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern, Madame le Deputy de Gruyère,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Lewis,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Tadier, Monsieur le Deputy Higgins, Monsieur le Deputy Masson, Madame le Deputy Pinel,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Martin,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Ouen,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Doublé, Monsieur le Deputy Labby, Monsieur le Deputy Wickenden, Monsieur le Deputy de Sainte-Marie,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Truscott,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Young,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Ash,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Moreau,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Guida,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Pierre,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de la Trinité,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Jean,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Lehegra,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Ayer,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Pechard,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Ward,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Elves,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Pamplin,
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Gardner.
Present.
Monsieur le greffier.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance sur la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir le cœur et l'affection de tous ceux qui la composent, et de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute la délibération est en accompagné de ta bénédiction. Réussis au bien et au soulagement du peuple qu'il te plu de commettre à leur soin. Car nous t'en prions, au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé, Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite en la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Ne nous induis point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car toi le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen. Monsieur le Sénateur Gorst,
Senator Gorst is out of the island on state's business.
State's business.
Madame le Sénateur Ferguson, Monsieur le Sénateur Lafondre,
Présent.
Madame le Sénateur Valois, Monsieur le Sénateur Pallet,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern,
To the vote.
Monsieur le Deputy Tadier,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Higgins,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Masson,
To the vote.
Madame le Deputy Doublé,
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Labby,
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Wickenden.
Présent.
Les États sont constitués. We finished last night on the amendment to P27 with the Minister about to sum up.
So, before we start, can I just inform you in the Assembly I need to be at a funeral at 10:30 and I'll be back as soon as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to start by thanking all the 26 members who have spoken in the debate. And I think it was a very good one. And as far as I'm concerned, the best for a very long time, having been a spectator previously of the States, because we were discussing matters of real importance to the public and our community. And I think the first thing I'd like to say is really good news that although we were debating the amendments, from the comments made by members, there is a clear consensus in this Assembly that we have to address the issue of climate change through moving to carbon neutrality on an accelerated timescale. So the debate, obviously, we had yesterday, as far as I'm concerned, was about the mechanics and the methods that we use in order to give us the best chance of success of doing so. And of course, no matter whether the amendments are passed on or not, I want to be clear, and I've made it quite clear to everybody, I shall be supporting the principle, because there is no disagreeing that we are in an emergency situation. But as all the reports say, what is required is a 12-year action plan. A plan that transcends this Assembly, elsewhere in other governments, and that requires us to have real methodologies, structure in place to how we're doing about it, step by step. I'm a very analytical person, and I tend to look at ways of achieving things. And there's that, my work with the civil service advisors, who I think we've got some really excellent people that have produced the amendments, and we have drawn upon the views, despite what was said yesterday, we have drawn upon the views of the Energy Forum, which I did in a bit more detail, and we tried to look at the best practice and the best way we can make things work in Jersey. And the debate yesterday, as a new minister, it's been a learning experience for me. As Deputy Martin said, I mean, share the same situation, though Deputy Martin, much longer than myself, moved from the backbenches into a ministerial position. And of course, it's made me realise that my communication skills are not what I thought they were. Because there was so much misunderstanding of what this amendment is about, and there has been some misrepresentation. And that saddens me. It's a learning. And so many members, I think, have got the impression, and how they've got it or even argued, that my purpose is to water down the importance of our tackling climate change seriously. And that I was astonished to hear it argued that my purpose is to delay and obfuscate this vital work towards carbon neutrality. And my purpose is entirely the opposite. It's to make sure that the fine words in here and the declarations we make are matched by delivery and action. Something which I hope becomes a fashion for this Assembly. So, I mean, those members who really believe that my purpose is to delay, do they really think that I would have the gall, if I'm allowed to say that, to stand in front and address the activists, the wonderful people who are putting themselves out there, the climate change activists in the square, and then come in here and seek to undermine them? Do members have so little faith and trust in me, in my sincerity? Is that really the case? If so, I wonder why I'm in my job. One or two of those contributions, sadly, and this is again new for me because I don't do personal, I think they did seek to personalise things rather. And I think there were a couple of contributions that were very highly politically motivated. But thankfully, thankfully. I praise members generally because they're majority.
Minister, would you sit down just a moment, please? Could I please ask those in the gallery to remove the banner? That's not permitted under standing orders. Thank you very much.
So whilst we have a natural break in the speech, it seems to me that the Minister is risking collectively breaching the standing order which imputes false motives on states members by saying that we have said that the purpose of his proposition or amendment is some nefarious ends. And I think that's not what I heard in the debate. I heard that we're saying the unintended consequences of the amendment may be negative, but that the intention of that wasn't. So would the Minister, would you be able to rule on that, sir?
Well, first of all, I'll ask the Minister to clarify.
Well, sir, I think what I was reporting is impressions. And later I'm going to go on to see the one or two particular comments that were made, which I think attributed purpose to me, which is not there. And so I've never said. So I suppose I withdraw. If members see that as a general slur, I apologise, because I was going on to say that the members did recognise the sincerity of myself and Deputy Gita. So hopefully that is sufficient. May I continue, sir?
Please continue.
Thank you. And of course there was another theme where I think one of it was those who didn't support my amendments draw a distinction between my role, in fact not just me, but individual ministers and the Council of Ministers. And I think I've seen an email this morning that suggests that having a minister responsible for progressing action plans is somehow flawed. That we've got to put it to the Council of Ministers. Well, it's a new experience for me. I've got news for people. Those, 10 people round the table with the volume of work we've got to do. The notion that we can only ever deal with the high-level responsibilities, the high-level tasks. And ministers have to be the engine of delivery. And a 12-year plan is a real big vehicle to deliver. And so, obviously, ministers are accountable to the Chief Minister. They're accountable to you, to members. If the Chief Minister thinks that a minister doesn't perform, he's got the power to dismiss. You've got it collectively as members. If you're not satisfied with the performance of any member, straight away, vote of no confidence, and that's it. And those mechanisms are there. Real accountability there is. And so I think that's a false and nonsensical division. Division. And I think we have no option in this to tackle this task, but to address practical resources at our disposal, which means our outstanding civil servants. And I want to pay tribute to them. And I feel as members know, I'm very uncomfortable with the situation in changes that many of those feel undervalued. Well, I certainly don't, and I don't believe members do. We have to make sure their contributions are valued, and their advice, and money. We all know we have a structural deficit. We are en route. We're going to have to make decisions to how we fund our government plan on. But as we speak, in 2019, this is a financially bad year for us. And so therefore, working within our resources is part of political leadership. And the role of ministers is to motivate those civil servants and provide the political leadership and to drive. And of course, I'm a past civil servant. I sometimes think, well, perhaps I'm thinking as a civil servant because I spent the majority of my working life as a senior executive. And I know how systems work. And I know that if politicians want to get things done, they have to work with the available machinery in the civil servants, in the resources, and use to have that sort of integration. And so otherwise, and I think that's infinitely more likely to succeed than just having what I would perhaps a very general, perhaps some might say airy-fairy, I'm not being pejorative in that term, but general aims with no focus on who's responsible, especially when there are no resources in place to get the task done and little prospect of getting them. Now, yesterday during the debate, because obviously I realised things were going against my amendments, particularly on Part A, that talks about whether or not the timescale. It's a valid issue. What's the timescale of this work? How are we going to start? And I've been exchanging emails with the Chief Minister and the Treasury Minister and the civil servants overnight this morning. And I'm told, and I got a full email, that I have to confess that I only got the full email about 5 minutes before the hearing, but I got the guts of the thing last evening, that it's going to require additional resources if my amendment of Part A is not approved. And those resources at the moment are estimated as around about £300,000, but I'm not sure that I can't be confident that it will not be more. Because if we're going to get work done by a consultant at the very time, every consultant, there's every local authority and government in the world seeking to look at those people, I suspect the price is going to go up. And so not only that, and of course I asked, well, can we get this? And the answer I got is no. Minister, you will not be able to get those additional resources agreed in our current system before the end of 2019. And that's the reaction I'm getting. So I think it's likely that one will be placed in an uncertain situation if my amendment is not passed, where we have to scratch around using what resources we've got, go into this bidding process that we had a debate yesterday, which I don't even understand as the investment thing, and take loose, I don't even know where those decisions last, but the evidence is that they don't deliver and they take a long time. So worryingly, it is likely that the work would have to be conducted. Also, the other aspect of it would have to be conducted in a policy vacuum out of context from our work in preparing the government plan. To deliver the CSP priorities, which join up all those elements. Constable St Saviour yesterday criticised because lacklustre performance at environment scrutiny. But of course we are dealing, the Infrastructure Minister and I, with split responsibilities. Waste, transport, I've got policy and so on. The only way we can join that up is through the CSP process. That's the only way, and that's why it's imperative we do this work in that. And my worry also is that we do have such a small team of leading civil servants on this. And I'd like to name them, but I think it's probably not protocol in the States, but people know who they are. That they will be diverted away from their vital role in coordinating and supporting that work of the CSP for the environment to do this, when in reality, I believe they're absolutely the same thing. I don't think I overstate that. So, for example, the Constable, I think it was Constable Greville, spoke about water. Absolutely spot on. Water pollution issues, or Constable St Saviour, water pollution issues. There's a whole suite of activities in the strategic plan about that. And I don't want to put any of those policy issues at risk. And then I think it was suggested somehow that the energy plan, which is the focus of part of the proposition, the amendment, that this is somehow a minor part of the exchanges. Look, I'm going to remind members, the energy plan is the states. It was agreed by the states. It has been in place for a number of years, and all our work has been in accordance with that plan. And of course, what does that strategy do? It charges the Minister of Environment with that role. And if the progress is not good enough, and I've set out a brief summary of where the progress is, get rid of me. Get somebody else. And I don't think there's any evidence that that energy plan hasn't worked so far. On the contrary. But what has happened? Aiming at a moving target. Aiming at a moving target. That the world's requirements changed, and we have to be much more ambitious. And that's why we need to change that ocean plan. And of course, much was made of what was called the focus of fiscal measures as the part B of the proposition, because it's too specific. But the reality of it, and also I read in an email this morning from the main proposition, focusing on fiscal measures is likely to frighten people off, and therefore we're not going to be able to achieve it. Dead right. We have to address those measures. How else are we going to deal with traffic and pollution issues unless we address fiscal measures? Where are those resources coming from? And so I make no apology for that focus. But of course, it's not an exclusive focus. It says, of course, this word wasn't omitted. This was omitted in the speech. It says to include it. It doesn't say only fiscal measures. It says include. It's part of a suite of work that has to be done. And I think, I don't want to see anybody arguing for maintaining the Olympic track record of not doing, signing up and not doing anything. So, the Energy Executive Advice, it was quoted. I believe it was quoted, their report. Members have all seen the full one. I hope every member's read it. If so, you will know it was quoted selectively. And it says, I've spoken already, it requires a concerted effort over 12 years. And they also say that the Energy Forum argue that the 2019 Energy Plan Review will provide a good framework for agreeing a new target for carbon emissions. That's what they say. I think that's nothing in our proposition that's inconsistent with that. That's what we looked at and put it. And then, of course, members have spoken about carbon sequestration and carbon offsetting as somehow, I don't quite know what members were saying about it. They clearly didn't like it. But the Energy Forum says is that they are valid and part of our plan. And so the Part B, and of course Part B, their comments on the original proposition of Part B says, the Energy Forum does not believe it will be practical to provide a detailed climate assessment of the proposals set out in the government plan as proposed in the original proposition. That is why the amendment seeks to include an assessment, but not just a theoretical climate change assessment, but going further on policies and how we do that. And so what my amendment seeks to do is to integrate the government plan into the energy policy. Now, for me personally, this has been a new experience for me. And of course, I think, I have failed to communicate clearly. My purpose has been misunderstood. I referred earlier to a word that Deputy Talley challenged. I won't repeat it. But it was said in a JEP headline that the targets were too ambitious. Now, I've never given an interview with a JEP. I've never said that. The only comments are made are what's in the amendment. And of course, a couple of personal comments, nicely dressed up, and thank you. But I think in the end, we really, I don't know, I'm going to leave that on. And then we've got political issues. Plainly, I have to be robust. And I really admired Deputy Ward's passion yesterday. Wow. Political rhetoric in full flow. It was scary. And I saw a new side of Deputy Ward's presentation. And thought, crikey, this is what's happening here. We both agree with the same thing, but we disagree. How are we going to get there? And I said, I do believe that some of the things that Deputy Ward said in his major speech yesterday against I believe did not fairly represent what I've tried to explain in the propositions. Now, I want to turn to a few specific responses. I particularly want to thank Deputy Hewlin, which I think summed up my purpose in a very few words. He summed up why I brought the proposition and put my head on the block to deliver it. And I've said, if it doesn't work, I'm accountable. You've got a mechanism. Where's your mechanism in the Council of Ministers? You're going to bring all the ministers down? You're going to mess up the whole thing? You're going to wreck the government plan? No. Deputy Martin clearly emphasised. I empathise with Deputy Martin. Obviously, I've seen the situations that she's been faced with in her new ministerial role, and Deputy Martin is leaps ahead of me with her passion and fire and her ability to see things through. And I've seen the way that some of the things have been more, well, and it's surprisingly, why some of the things that many having to deal with many negative comments. And that's a shame. And so I think some of these probably issues, I think I put them down to dysfunctional elements caused by our ministerial system. They would not happen before, and I think members know that we've not quite got this right yet, where we set members against each other when we're all agreeing with the same things and we all become divided. And I hope very much we can have an agenda of change there in the future. So it is frustrating being a minister. You have little resources, but what the ministers provide is leadership and passion. They're going to work with these resources. So also I want to thank the former Minister of the Environment, who absolutely understands what I've said here, because I know that he had a number of well thought out, hard work policies that didn't survive this assembly. We're now having to deal with the consequences of that. Whole set of sound policies about urban planning, infrastructure levy and so on, all of which I believe was sound and would have put us in a better position. I don't want us to be in this position on the climate change. So I think, in conclusion, a very good debate yesterday, and I appreciate members' efforts, because 26 members is a massive, massive contribution. And I want to say, whatever happens on the amendments, I should be supporting the main proposition, whatever the outcome. But I truly do believe that the amendments that I put forward, with the support of civil servants and advice and all those that members, a good number of members recognise, I don't have time for listening, provides the best way of getting there. So, I will, in conclusion, as I said yesterday, sir, I do believe that there were different arguments coming forward about Propositions A and B. Proposition A deals with the timescale of the work. Proposition B deals with the specific focus that is included by the work we need to do. And I think that these do stand separately, and therefore I'd ask if I could propose Parts A of my amendment and Parts B separately, sir. I believe it's best, in doing so, if both Parts A and Parts B are separate. But if I was forced to make a choice, Part B is absolutely critical. So would I be allowed to propose those votes separately?
It means, I think, Minister, that the penultimate line may need to be adjusted because it refers to the review of the energy plan, which does not appear in the main proposition and only appears in Part A. So members can proceed to vote for it separately on the assumption that the last and penultimate lines perhaps are not there because the review won't take place according to this proposition at any rate.
Thank you, sir. On that basis, I'm happy to go along with that if no other member stands up and makes an objection. Perhaps I'll wait. No, nobody. Could I therefore propose Part A of the proposition, sir, and ask for the appel on Part A?
All right, the appel is called for. Invite members to return to their seats.
So before the vote, could I raise the defo on Deputy Southern, please?
Propose the defo be raised on Deputy Southern. The defo is raised. So the vote is on Part A of the amendment, which would substitute that paragraph A for a paragraph A of the main proposition, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members had the opportunity of voting, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated, 22 votes in favour, 25 votes against. I now ask the greffier to reset the system. And we turn to paragraph B, which substitutes paragraph B for paragraph B of the main proposition. Ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members had the opportunity of voting, I can announce, ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that this amendment has been adopted. 24 votes in favour, 23 votes against.
Have the 24, please. Sir.
And the 23, please.
The 24 in favour were Senators Farnham, Ferguson, Le Fondre, Valois, the Constables of St Clement, St Ballard, Greville, St John, St Mary, St Juan, and Deputies Martin, Greville, Lewis, Pinnell, St Martin, St Juan, St Mary, Truscott, Young, Ash, Guida, St Peter, Trinity, Pamplin. And those voting contra were Senators Moore, Pallet, Mezek, and the Constables of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Saviour, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Higgins, Doublé, Labby, Wickenden, Morel, St John, Lahegra, IA, Pershard, Ward, Alves, and Gardner.
So I would like to raise a point of order. I didn't want to do it during the speech, perhaps for tactical reasons, but there's a convention that in summing up, whoever's moving the amendment or the proposition tries not to introduce new information because it can't be responded to, obviously, by anyone else. And I know the Minister will say that he only received the cost implications of 300,000 at the very end, conveniently for this morning. But the proposition by Deputy Ward had been lodged for a very long time, and it's completely unsatisfactory for these kind of figures to be brought to us at the last minute when members can't respond to them, sir.
Well, Deputy, you are right that the proposer of any proposition ought not to introduce new material in a reply, and that is a point of general approach. I have to say that it wouldn't be the first time that it has happened in this Assembly. Minister, is there anything you wish to add to that?
So if it helps, I apologise for that, sir. I'm very new to this role, and I thought this was a material matter because yesterday I did speak about the resources issue generally, although I didn't have a figure on it.
Yeah.
But of course that had to do, so I do apologise for that, sir.
So I thank the Minister. He's new to the role, but the civil servants aren't. They've played this game a long time.
Well, the question of resources did come up during the main debate, and indeed Deputy Guida addressed the question of cost at some length. And indeed the figures he used puts £300,000 rather in the shade, but still. Very well. We now return to the main proposition as amended. Paragraph B has been amended. It is now open for debate. Deputy Labby.
Sir, I listened with interest to the debate yesterday. I'm going to support Deputy Ward's proposition. It's an important proposition, it's an important debate, and the speeches and contributions yesterday were excellent. They did often, and you gave members generous leeway, sir, because a lot of what was referred to was in the substantive proposition. We have I don't want to undermine or denigrate or say that this debate isn't important. It is vital. We have a very heavy schedule today, and there is absolutely no need for members, we listened intently to everything that members said, there's no need for them to repeat what they said yesterday in the substantive debate, or to repeat what other members have said in the debate or are about to say in the debate, and we must discipline ourselves in that regard, if you don't mind me saying so, sir. We do have a heavy schedule. It is important, but no repetition and conciseness and economy would be appreciated.
A heavy schedule accompanied by a heavy hand. Excellent. Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. Wow. Note taken. I just want... Yeah, just sit down. No, hang on. I didn't take part in the debate yesterday to speak about climate change because, as Deputy Labby pointed out, it was on the amendments, and I thought others did that well. But I want to bring the subject back into what we were talking about, and that is, of course, the proposition brought by Deputy Ward. There appears to be no single definition of a climate emergency, but it is generally agreed among those calling for the notion that climate change represents the greatest threat to all walks of life, including national security, interestingly, the economy, social well-being, which is a big passion of mine, and the natural environment. While symbolic, such a declaration by an authority or government, which is looking like it's coming, would recognise the life-threatening risks that will come with an inactivity over climate change. The statements about carbon emissions are true. The Global Carbon Project, a study released last December, revealed that the presence of CO2 in the atmosphere is higher than it's been in millions of years. At the end of 2018, the United Nations Secretary General said climate change is the defining issue of our time and said that the planet faces a direct existential threat. If we do not change course by 2020, we risk missing the point where we can avoid runaway climate change with disastrous consequences for people and the natural systems that sustain us, he warned. His predecessor, Ban Ki-moon, warned a decade earlier. This is an emergency, and for an emergency situation, we need an emergency action and probably new ways of thinking. According to the UN's annual Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that I haven't heard mentioned yet, humans have 12 years to make unprecedented changes to all aspects of society before climate change's effects, environmental disasters and famine are irreversible. Therefore, no challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change. 2014 was the planet's warmest year on record. Now, 1 year doesn't make a trend, but this point does, I believe. 14 of the 15 warmest years on record have all fallen in the first 15 years of this century. Fact. To hit the point even more home locally, I urge everybody to do a search for the warmest day on record on local media websites like Channel 103, the Jersey Evening Post, etc. You'll find many stories repeated that confirm, including just this past February, when Jersey had its warmest February day on record, beating the previous one and smashing it back in 1948. I have heard some folks try to dodge the evidence by saying things like, these people, they're not scientists, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't have the right information. This is not a political argument, I do not believe. I'm not a scientist, surprisingly, and I'm not defined by my politics or faith or the roots I came from. But you know what? I know what makes a lot of really good scientists around the world, or respected experts and professors at major universities and people on the television that have been quoted many times in this debate. They're telling us what we already know. In fact, our children are starting to tell us what we already know. And that was the conversation I had with Beatrice this morning. Sweetheart, what's the most important thing to you, apart from me and the Cocoa Pops that somehow you're eating without me telling you could? And she said, Daddy, I'm worried about my pets. I'm worried about the future. I'm worried about we're not acting quickly. That's my daughter. She's 10 years old. She's going to be 11. She gets it. She's coming into a world where she's looking up at us to act quickly. How many times in our short political careers, for some of us, or longer for others, have you been asked, oh, things are so slow, things don't happen, and you've said in interviews or on the doorstep or to your parishioners, you're right, isn't it slow? Doesn't things take time? This is one of those moments where we can actually look everybody in the eye now and say, actually, yes, this is one of those times we can act quickly, we can do something, because soon, in 12 years' time and in years to time, we'll miss that opportunity. So I congratulate the Deputy for bringing what I think is a proposition for our time. I hope in years to come that we can all look back and say we did some good here, we did try to move urgently, and we did try and make a difference. This is for our children, this is for our children's children, and that's why I wanted to stand up today. And I commend everybody for getting involved. Let's keep it on the issues. Let's not make things personal. Let's leave that for others to do. Let's just make a difference. Thank you, sir.
Chief Minister.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just want to address 2 points. One might sound a little bit administrative, if that's the right word, but in other words, Part C of this is to place sorry, I'm just going to read the wording, sir. To place the actions to tackle climate change in Jersey is included as a standing item on the agenda of the Council of Ministers. And I will say, although it probably is not going to be the world-shattering end if that is approved, I'm not supporting that particular part. Principally, I will be obviously supporting the amended Part A and obviously Part B as amended. Essentially, the structures that are in place already is the delivery of the energy plan is overseen by the Jersey Energy Partnership, and it's their role to monitor and review it. And the partnership is 2 parts. It's got a ministerial energy executive, and a multi-stakeholder energy forum. Now, the executive is responsible for the ongoing monitoring of the actions as outlined in the energy plan. They review the delivery and develop and commission new policy areas or actions accordingly. And it's made up of the following ministers, which is obviously the Minister for Environment, who I would hope everybody endorses his passion, particularly for this area, but for environmental matters generally. The Minister for Economic Development, Tourism, Sport and Culture, Minister for Infrastructure, and the Minister for Social Security. And therefore, it is considered that there is sufficient ministerial oversight for delivery of the plan. Obviously, what then happens is the Energy Executive brings matters to the attention of the Council of Ministers as and when needed. So that's worked successfully to date. The only risk one will have, alternatively, is that we will have a standing item on the agenda, and essentially, very often, there'll just be no matters to report recorded. So I'm trying to be relatively practical from that point of view. It's not going to be the end of the world if the Assembly do go for it, but I just want to explain why I won't be supporting that part. To go back to the main parts, obviously, I don't think any of us need serious persuading that climate change is a serious challenge. I did vote for the energy plan in 2014, which is the island's most ambitious carbon reduction plan, obviously, to date. And obviously, as Chief Minister, I did support and we did put in the environment and climate change as one of the key 5 strategic objectives in the CSP. And that actually states we must demonstrate to global partners that we take our global environmental responsibilities seriously, and global climate change is a direct threat to Jersey. And obviously, again, if we're putting children first, oddly enough, protect the environment is going to be pretty high up there. I just wanted to end, sir, with a slight a comment as well. Obviously, the Minister has referred to the extra resource requirements. And it is an element of possibly irony, sir, that a number of members who are critical of using external consultants have basically just asked the Minister to take on extra consultants at an extra cost. And bear in mind the work was going to be scheduled to take place in 2020 anyway. And the reason I make that, sir, hopefully it's a recognition that there are times when external expertise is required, that an extra cost is required to be paid. And I'll just put that point out there in the general context. On that note, sir, so I'm very obviously happy to be and delighted to be supporting parts A and B. I want to explain my reason I won't be supporting part C. I'll leave it for a matter of the Assembly, but in practical terms, it's just an administration matter. Thank you, sir.
If no other member wishes to speak, Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. And I will just say to Deputy Labby that just because some members couldn't stick to the point of the amendment yesterday, for those of us who did speak to the amendment, we're not going to be penalised from a second, not even a second speech on the main proposition to focus on the very critical issue of climate change. Because if we can't spend 5 or 10 minutes more talking about the future of the whole of humanity and all the biodiversity that exists on the planet, because we have to go on to talk about who chairs this Assembly, then I'm afraid we've got our priorities wrong. Both are very important issues for different reasons. The first, listening to these kind of debates, I'm reminded of the old gospel song, which says, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And I'll use that example to develop into a couple of different areas, but the first point, I think it's quite clear what's meant by that, but just in case it's not, is that we all aspire to, apparently, to what Deputy Ward wants to achieve. We want to save the planet, we want to become carbon neutral, and we want to at least try and slow down as far as possible the human impact that we're having in terms of carbon on the planet. And of course, when we talk about carbon, that's a portmanteau word, not just for carbon dioxide, but for all the greenhouse gases which are emitted and which we contribute to. And it shows that there is an element of doublethink within that, because we know that climate change is real. We know that because we're told by the best experts around from a whole host of different areas and of all different kinds of political persuasions. But scientists, of course, need to try and remain objective, and they look at the evidence, and all the evidence does tell us that we're going in that one direction where there are dire consequences if we don't act. So yet we still get people standing up saying, but we can't act too quickly because I'm a realist. And this is where we get the concept of doublethink coming in, where the doublethink, as we know, the Orwellian concept suggests that you can hold two competing and mutually contradictory beliefs at the same time, but still believe that they're both true. And the facts are that something needs to give. Something needs to give because actually our reality that we live in is completely subjective, and we only need to go back a few centuries to realize that pre-Galileo, in around about the 1600s, it was the norm to believe that the earth was flat. That was reality. People would stand up, look, I'm a realist, I'm not going to go and travel on that boat for too far because eventually I will fall off the end of the world. So I'm not going to do that. And they had to listen to the crazy people who at that time were the scientists. They studied the stars. They were tantamount to astrologers because astronomers didn't exist in that sense. They were the real scientists of the time. And actually it turned out that the crazy people were the right ones. And later on, as we get on, we realise that there are similar parallels to be made. And today, we also live in a world whereby the consequences of that reality and that knowledge, if the penny truly drops, and I think it is starting to drop for many people, we know that we cannot go on living as we do. We live in a world where we're consuming resources far quicker than we could ever hope to replenish them, and the consequences of that are dire. In the Jersey context, what does that mean? Well, Jersey's very good at tax neutrality, but we need to learn to be excellent at carbon neutrality. And what I also mean by that is the fact that there are consequences for the neoliberal model that is being pursued by the world, because as others have said in the past, whilst we all consume to excess, it's the wealthy who consume the most. And we also have a model, not just in Jersey, but Jersey is an excellent microcosm of that, where we actually promote tax breaks for the richest people, not just in Jersey, but throughout the whole of the planet. And the consequence of that, and the paradox, if you like, is that we get people standing up yesterday, and I'm glad Sarah Ferguson's just putting her light on, because she's one of the people I'm talking about, saying that actually we've got to be careful about what we do because it's going to have an impact on poor people. So if you introduce a tax on travel, whether that's airplane travel or cars, all the things that we have to do and we have to get to grips with if we're going to solve the problem, then it's going to have a negative impact on the poor. Well, it will only have a negative impact on the poor if you do ecology under the current system and don't reform your economic system. What we need, and she's partly right, is that capitalism is the problem. We do, if not to destroy capitalism, we certainly need to fundamentally reform capitalism. I'm not sure if that's possible. And you need ecological socialism if we're going to have any hope in the world. Because, and what do I mean by that? It means that if you're going to impose a high tax on carbon and on petrol and on diesel, which we inevitably will need to do, and Greta and others talk about politicians needing to be truthful. At some point, the DFI minister and the environment minister and all of us are going to have to be honest with the public and say, you will have to pay for the damage. And what we're going to do for you as part of that social contract is we're going to put on much improved transport. So in Jersey, that means we are going to have many more buses. And isn't it an irony that when Deputy Ward asks a written question saying, well, wouldn't it be good to have free buses in Jersey? One of the reasons for which is not just because we're socialists and we want nobody to pay for anything at the point of use. It's because actually we want people to use public transport, get cars off the road and then reduce emissions, all of those good things. Free buses is a possible way of doing it. Say, oh yeah, but the problem with that is that will increase the number of people who use the buses and we might need more buses. And that's not a Monty Python or a private eye response that's been fabricated. That's actually a real response which you can find on the internet in Jersey to a question about climate change. So whilst we can all aspire to that, we can't even give sensible questions to answers to questions that are being asked today. And more globally, what it means is that we have to change the way we think, and we're all culpable here. So when it comes to the ability to just jump on a plane and travel halfway or quarter away across the world, because there's such a thing as a cheap flight. And I'm one of those who've benefited, if you like, in inverted commas, from the cheap flight revolution. It's quite remarkable. Previous generations couldn't. I vaguely remember the times when it costs quite a lot even just to get to the UK by plane. Now we pay a lot to get to the UK by boat, even though the boats are the least polluting. And in the UK, they were talking on Radio 2 the other week when they focused specifically on climate issues. And they were saying that in terms of carbon, to travel from London to Edinburgh, it's clearly much worse to travel by plane. The other thing is that it takes longer to travel from London to Edinburgh by plane, because by the time you've waited at the airport, cleared security, waited on the runway, taken off, landed, taxied, and then got out the other side, possibly with luggage, it actually takes longer to travel from London to Edinburgh by plane than by train, and it's much worse for the environment. So why on earth would people do that? It's because it's cheaper. And it's because the whole economic model in the UK is completely skewed, and the same can be applied to Jersey on a smaller scale, although we have a very good bus service, I would say, on the southern route. And we need to completely turn that on its head. We need to make sure that it's expensive for people to travel around the world by plane. But there are consequences for that, because going back to the original quote about the gospel, everybody wants to get to heaven, everybody wants to get to climate and carbon neutrality, but nobody wants to die, but nobody wants to change the way that they live. So when there's an announcement the other day that there's a new airline setting up between Bournemouth and Jersey, how should we react to that? So if I ask Senator Farnham or the Chief Minister or anyone else, that's good news, right? So the announcement that's put out in the media that there's a new flight, an airline coming from Bournemouth to Jersey, that's good news. But of course, it's not good news for the environment. So the first thing we have to do is point that out and at least question it. So you send out a tweet saying, so this week we're debating climate change. There's been an announcement of a new airline opening to Jersey. Is that good news? And of course you get responses saying, are you not in favour of tourism? Do you not want tourists to come to the island? And of course, I think most of us say, well, we do want an element of tourism. We do want Jersey to survive, but we need a model that's sustainable. So isn't it the right time at the moment, for example, and why aren't we already doing it, thinking about having a second operator for the ferry service? Goodness knows that there are many good reasons for it other than just the environment. I think the public are crying out for a second ferry company to operate in Jersey. There's probably the market for it, but there's certainly the emerging climate control arguments that can be used in that respect. So the points I'm making is that we fundamentally have to challenge everything that we do, and that the realism that we think we live under at the moment is completely an illusion when we start looking at it through the eyes of climate change. That there's clearly not much appetite for this kind of talk at the moment. We've seen that I think a lot of the Assembly is now vacated, so I apologise for that. But I don't apologise because I know that there are many people who've campaigned very hard, not just in recent days and weeks, giving up their time and actually putting themselves in the Royal Square, but right throughout the world, and also for many, many years when it wasn't popular. So it's to those individuals in particular that I would like to pay tribute, whether they're based in Jersey. I know I've got some very committed constituents, and I think they're upstairs. I pay tribute to them as well, but to all the individuals around the world who are taking stances when it's unpopular, and often against their own individual interests, because ultimately they've seen the reality, and when you've glanced the truth and you've understood it, you can't unknow that truth.
Call on Deputy Ash.
Thank you, sir. I shall obey the edict of Deputy Labby. I would say, though, I did find Deputy Tedier's assertion that we should debate this subject, have a 10-minute speech, I agree, before moving on to perhaps less important issues. But he was the man who gave us the 3.5-hour debate on whether Jerry should be the third language in the chamber, so I find that slightly rich. one thing
Sorry, could I challenge? I wouldn't normally. I didn't decide whether the debate would be 3.5 hours. I'm sure my contribution in the Gerrier debate was relatively short, and it shows that it was clearly an issue which the Assembly wanted to debate, sir.
Deputy, you've got to take the slings and arrows of outrageous debate.
Thank you, sir. One thing that did occur to me, and it occurred to me the other evening when I was talking to Jersey Telecom, there are major things we can do as an entity here, and people have to pick the baton up and run with it. They can do now, we are the only place in the world with 100% 4G coverage, the only place in the world, right? They tomorrow, if we can find the political will, they could put a GP's facility into every single house so people wouldn't have to visit the GP. It could just be there in their front room. They can do that tomorrow. Talking to their chairman, we have a 5-year window to put some fantastic things in. We could be one of the centres of marine environment technology here. We can be massive. It's there. We have a 5-year window when we're going to be ahead of the rest of the world. But it's up to every single member in this chamber to go and see them. I can get Phil Mail, the chairman of Jersey Telecom, come and see you, Deputy Ward, and we can really drive this forward. But there's no point all talking about it. Let's go and see them. Let's say, what can you do to make us a greener place, to reduce our carbon using the technology that we have at our disposal, where we are the only place in the world that has at our disposal. So let us look towards doing that. And I'm fully supportive of this proposition, but we have to use what we have at our disposal. And we've got some pretty powerful tools. We're not as small on the global stage as we might think. And I'll just end, sir, with saying one more thing, is that when the Environment Minister brings in and it's no good fudging the issue, some very unpopular decisions that will take place in the budget. And when the Treasurer and the Environment Minister bring that budget with some things that will not go down particularly well with the public, but are necessary if we're going to drive this forward, this chamber cannot be found wanting. All the people who stood up and said yesterday, I'm fully behind this, let's drive it forward, when those measures are here, and they get someone going, oh, well, I don't want to pay this extra amount on petrol, or whatever it may be, you have got to be found to be strong. Not, as happened in the past in here, where people back down.
Honourable Southern.
Thank you, sir. Can I start by saying how much I appreciated that previous speech, surprisingly. It's absolutely the right tenor of mood that we should be taking today, and to be repeated when it comes to budget decisions, etc. But I just wanted briefly, in order to ensure my vote, I'm sound-minded to vote for this proposition as amended, I'd just like to hear from the proposer how he sees its amended proposition being delivered.
Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, sir. I think I probably should start by saying I'm an absolutely firm capitalist, and I believe in equality of opportunity. I think I probably owe the state and the farming community a slight apology, sir. I was informed yesterday evening by the agricultural members of this assembly that the farmers are actually doing rather more to improve the carbon content of their soil than it was I perhaps understood, and therefore I apologize to them and to this assembly. I don't know whether people noticed in the paper yesterday or one day this week, British Steel have had to take out a £100 million loan to pay carbon credits. And one of the questions that has come up over the last couple of days is, what is carbon neutral? You know, carbon sequestration that they talk about includes putting the carbon back into the soil, so that all the measures the farmers are taking are actually positive. And the garbage guzzler, which is up at the airport, they haven't got the home models available yet, is actually changing food waste into something which will put carbon back into the soil. So that's carbon sequestration. And it's an important thing, but it's an environmental thing. That's the important part about it. It's not just buying a few trees. The proposals put forward by Deputy Ward are really talking about de-industrialisation. You know, there is a power station in the north of England, Drax, which was a very efficient power station, and it has been converted from coal to wood pellets. And the wood pellets are being made in the United States from ancient forests, which are being logged and cut up into pellets and sent to the UK to go into a power station and burnt. I have never heard anything so regressive and stupid in my life. And we're going to have to drive electric cars. But if firms like British Steel, may I have a glass of water, please? Firms like British Steel, if they have to buy carbon credits, the price of the raw materials is going up. Will we be able to afford the cars? It's an end to air conditioning. Ask the people in South Australia what they think about it. And many of the conveniences of modern living. And definitely an end to the prospect of affordable energy for third world countries and a significant increase in the cost of electricity. There will also be a substantial increase in unemployment as industries fold. So here we are. The Deputy Southern has already mentioned, Deputy Tadier, the fact that pensioners and lower income families will revert to a similar position to medieval serfs, unable to travel because of the costs. You know, they're talking of thermostats pegged at 19 degrees centigrade. It makes me think of Brave New World, 1984, call it what you will, it's a dictatorship. Don't forget, Cristina Figueiredo, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations, wants to use this opportunity to get rid of capitalism and convert everything to socialism. That's what she said in public. My generation have lived through the tail end of World War II, the Korean War, Suez, Vietnam, the Cold War, nuclear winter forecast, global cooling, the millennium bug, forecasts of starvation, reduced life expectancy, 42 I think they said it was. I think you and I must have beaten that, sir. I think. You know, reduced life expectancy, peak oil, the population will exceed food supply, excessive air pollution, childbearing will be a crime. We're actually dealing with all these matters that have arisen. But as H.L. Mencken said, he was a columnist with the New York Times, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the population alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. And if he'd met computer models, he'd have damned them too. I prefer the philosophy of Julian Simon, the economist who had the utmost faith in the power and ingenuity of the human mind. I follow the Julian Simon approach. I am not prepared to sacrifice our children's and grandchildren's future on the basis of political correctness, computer models, or hobgoblins. And to paraphrase Bill Clinton, it's the environment, stupid. That I support. This proposition I cannot.
On Constable St John.
Thank you, sir. I would urge that members take this as an opportunity to think outside the box. I don't want this to be a negative approach. And I say this, sir, because the last thing I want to see is people lying in the middle of the road trying to stop cars. Because all that will do is increase the carbon footprint with the cars being stationary. It'll slow the economy, it'll reduce taxation and increase the burden on society as a whole. Let us embrace it and use what we really can. And I was delighted with the speech from the Assistant Treasury Minister, Deputy Lash, about Jersey Telecoms and what they can do. And it reminds me, sir, of a sketch, and if I can just humour you shortly. Many years ago, between the two Ronnies, they were both dressed up as cavemen, and Ronnie Corbett was sat next to the fire in the cave. And Ronnie Barker wheeled in a great big round stone. And Ronnie Corbett said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's a wheel." And he said, "What's it for?" He said, "I don't know. I just thought I'd go down in history as being the first person to invent the wheel." I say this because we've got 100% fibre in all our homes. Let's use that as a way of preventing journeys so that you don't get in your car, so you don't have to run over the people who lie in the road. A very interesting point too. We need to act sensibly and not a knee-jerk reaction. My last car, I traded in when it was 16 years old. I intend to keep my current car, which is a diesel, for at least 15 years. I don't want to trade that in 2 or 3 years' time for an electric car, because the footprint of doing so is worse than continuing the way I am. And we need common sense with this approach. And I urge that members understand this, and that in the thinking that we're going to have to adopt is going to be different, but it needs to contain those degrees of common sense. I will support this because I think it is right that we should make a statement and move forward. But I do have this serious hesitation about setting ourselves up to fail. In a speech made yesterday, it's better to set a target and fail than to set no target. I fundamentally disagree with that, because if I set a target, I expect to achieve it, and I sack people if they don't. Thank you, sir.
Call on Deputy St Martin.
Thank you, sir. So at the outset of this debate, when we discussed the amendments, I said I was in a dilemma, and that was a dilemma as to whether to support the amendment or the original proposition. That dilemma was because I don't like being hypocritical. I don't like to say one thing and then do another, and I certainly don't like to vote in favour of the principles of something and then vote against the detail later on when it comes down the line. And I was disappointed that in highlighting the challenges and the costs and the difficulty in achieving carbon neutrality, that I was accused of somehow not supporting the cause, because nothing could be further from the truth. However, I am clear in my mind that I'm one member of this Assembly who does know the subject well, and I understand completely the whole list of issues that will be before us, their difficulty, and how painful they will be to make. On electric vehicles, we know we're going to have to accelerate the take-up. That's charging points, reducing and subsidising parking charges. We've got to find ways of increasing bike use, getting people to walk more. We're going to have to adopt anti-diesel and petrol car policies. We're going to have to increase massively charging for parking. We're going to have to reduce massively the cost of using public transport. That's all going to cost, as is moving away from oil and gas to heat our houses. We're going to have to go to electric heat pumps. We're going to have to specify carbon neutral houses. That's going to cost. And we're going to have to increase the bylaws to make it even more difficult for people to convert. That's expensive too. On renewable energy, we're going to have to get used to wind farms on land and offshore, and solar arrays. we're going to have to embrace turbine technology. That's going to cost not only physically in pounds, but that's going to cost us visually in the way we interpret our countryside and the way we look at it when it's full of solar and potentially wind turbines. We're going to have to find ways to get our farmers to capture more carbon in their land. We're going to have to continue to embrace nuclear energy, and while it says lots of good things about carbon, the cost of the infrastructure will continue, and we will continue to have to invest in it. We're going to have to change the way we feed ourselves. We're going to have to change our diets, specifically lamb, beef, and dairy products. And we will have to accept that the cost of some of these products will go up by 40 or 50%, and we'll have to accept that. And find ways of helping those that find that a difficult cost to cope with. The UK are going to have to plant 2.7 billion trees to achieve carbon neutrality. That's about a 20% increase in the conversion of agriculture to forestry, and we may have to do the same here. We'll have to discuss with our farming community how we achieve that. And when it comes to transport, whether it's aviation, mainly aviation, but also in boats, we're going to have to pay extra for our tickets as the companies operating those services find ways to offset the costs of looking at the alternative energy that they will have to use in moving us around. All I wanted to do in supporting the amendment was to do a proper job of looking to how we might achieve all these targets. And so I'm grateful that we've agreed that extra year. But it's still going to be a challenge, but it's work that we must take up and do. I am absolutely going to support this proposition, but I say this to all those members who are also going to push the pour button this morning. Saying yes today is the easy bit. It's the very easy bit, and it can only get more difficult and more challenging from now on. But I look forward to member support as we move ahead to tackle all these issues, the most important issues facing our globe today. Thank you, sir.
Deputy St Peter.
Thank you, sir. I think this is following on from a theme of the more recent speakers. And obviously, that is all it is. So I'm honouring the Deputy Labby's request to keep it brief. Obviously, we must not only support this proposition, but I suggest every member of this Assembly endeavours to find and support their own projects and initiatives to take us in that carbon neutral direction. We've spent best part of half a day discussing process, timing, accountability, but this is something that we can actually do now, today. Now, for my part, I've been approached to help with a concept. I'm using the loosest word as I can, because it's far too early and commercially sensitive to give any details. Sorry to be capitalist about it. All I can say is that it ticks every box in our pursuit to be carbon neutral. However, it's only one, and if we all champion an idea with 14 ideas, we can start today to make a difference today. We don't then have to wait for the timings of 220. It's the sum of the parts that will make the difference.
Deputy Gardner. Deputy Gardner? Sorry, I thought you indicated a wish to speak. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, Deputy Morrow.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to say I was disappointed in the Minister's admonishments because I feel they're wholly inappropriate. As I mentioned yesterday, my daughter, and we heard today Deputy Pampton's daughter, are fearful and they're fed up. I believe the people in the gallery, the people outside, are also fed up. And I ask why? Why 30, 40 years after this story, the scientific evidence which underpins our knowledge of climate change, why are we still doing so badly? And the reason is because it's the failure of leadership. The people in the square, Deputy Pampton's daughter, my daughter, they want leadership. I actually stood and spoke to them a couple of times, and both times I was saying, it's not so much the government that you need to be protesting against. It's, what we need is practical advice to help islanders move away from our own activities and the way that we pollute, whether it's in our cars, whether it's travelling around the world in aeroplanes, etc. But actually, I've been listening and looking at more statistics, and I think, no, you know what? I understand why you might protest government, and our government in particular, and not, again, I'll say like I did yesterday, not specifically this government, but all the governments over the past 30 years. And the reason is because they've done so very, very little. That's the truth. And that's why when I hear the minister saying that, telling us off, I think, well, why are you saying this? Well, you are genuinely trying to water down a proposition, and you're saying that it's our fault, and I just don't get that. I mean, let us look. Oh no! First of all, let us look at the Pathway 2050 progress. Both the Chief Minister and the Environment Minister talked about, we've got this pathway, it's fantastic. Well, if I read from there, I can tell you that emissions in the energy and transport sector, so this is the most recent review, the 2017 review of our progress on that Pathway 2050. It states, emissions in the energy and transport sectors increased slightly in 2016, but all other sectors remain static or marginally decreased. Now, if that's a response to an emergency, to increase slightly, to remain static, and at best, at our very best, to marginally decrease, then I say, where has the leadership been? Because it's clear we haven't. We haven't moved. We have rested on the laurels of the decarbonisation of our electricity supply for far, far too long. It's now time to move beyond it. You read anything our government puts out about our progress on climate change, and they will say, well, we've 28% decrease since on 1990 levels, entirely due, basically, to the decarbonisation of our electricity supply, which happened years ago. We can't keep looking there. We can't keep thinking, wow, we've done that 30% decrease, that's fantastic, we're better than so many other nations, so many other jurisdictions. Yes, but now we need to move on, and we need the leadership to push us forward to move on. So when I hear the Constable of St John talking about basically abdicating the leadership position, it really, really worries me, because we want leadership. Islanders want leadership, and if this government can't give leadership, then the next government will. I promise you that. It is disappointing. Let me just read some more, just to put through the fact. This is a list of actions in response to our marginal decreases. Okay, so this is a list of actions that the government has come up with as far as in terms of commercial and government policy. So this is how the government currently wants to help us respond to a climate emergency. To continue to run a lunch and learn programme. To continue to encourage businesses to monitor energy use. A series of good practice case studies to be published. JPH to continue to monitor and manage energy use. Oh, and the State's Jersey Treasurer's report will include the annual sustainability report. Okay, let's move to the annual sustainability report. Let's see how well the government itself is doing in combating climate change in its own actions. Total air miles, total emissions from air travel made by this government, as in our States of Jersey, 2016, 1.4 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. That's 2016, 1.4. 2017, 1.5. 2018, 1.8 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Is that progress in combating climate change? We've done an almost 30% increase in the amount of carbon dioxide this government puts into the atmosphere through air travel in the last 2 years. We look at total emissions from government, all government operations, including vehicle, fleet, etc. 2016, 19 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. 2017, it did fall slightly to 18.6. 2018, though, We didn't like the fall, so we put it back up to 19.9. So we're now basically more than 5%, or about 5% higher in 2018 than we were in 2016 in the amount of CO2 that this government emits. That's what the leadership that we have had over the past 30 years has brought us. And so I am incredibly disappointed to see the watering down of Deputy Ward's proposition. And I do wonder, because financial levers, fiscal levers, yes, they are important, they do play a role, they do need to be balanced, but fiscal levers, it's just so strange that that amendment to this proposition focused so heavily on fiscal levers. And then I just wondered, and I do apologise in advance to impute motives, but it's a cash-strapped department. Fiscal levers will probably bring in a bit of money to boost that budget, which, whilst being a good thing, does make me think, don't just focus on the fiscal levers, because it's not just about the department's budget. So, you know, definitely, no question, I urge everyone, this should be unanimous, adopt the proposition. But we now need a stronger, better proposition, to be honest with you, to come later, soon but later, because as I've shown you, government after government after government in Jersey has failed to get to grips with climate change. It has rested on its laurels. It's not helped the islanders move away from the habits driving, you know, I said it yesterday, the Sustainable Transport Plan has not succeeded. We cannot keep pointing at it, as the Minister did. We've got a Sustainable Transport Plan. Yes, we've got an energy pathway. They're all failing. They're not working. And so we can't just keep pointing at plans and keep monitoring and keep saying, oh, we've got to assess, we've got to monitor. It doesn't work. You do need to. I have studied environmental decision-making. So I appreciate the need for a practical take on how you move forward. Deeply embedded in the way I think about the environment is it has to be practical. But at the same time, we, as a government, as a State Assembly, have to be inspirational. And we are failing to be inspirational. The proposition isn't as inspirational as it was. You know, like I say, hopefully we can re-amend it back into a more inspirational position. And, you know, it is time that this Assembly and the government that comes from it really did think about the future and about what they're leaving behind. We cannot think in a 1950s way anymore. We cannot think in the ways of the past. This is the 21st century. We do need new economic thinking. We do need to build a sustainable economy. And that does mean moving away from the way many of us have been taught for the whole of our lives, this is just the way it is, it has to be like this. No, it does not. And so, you know, please do vote for it, but please do know that we need more now. We need stronger, and we need action, Minister. And I expect to see action, whether it's with fiscal levers or without fiscal levers, because we need inspiration. And that has to come from here. And we have to lead islanders to a better future than the treading water that we've been doing for the past 3 or 4 decades. Thank you, sir.
Constable St Lawrence.
Thank you, sir. And excuse me, I'm pleased to follow one of my new deputies, and I've listened closely to what he said, at risk of incurring the wrath of our PPC chairman. I will try to not repeat what has already been said, but I want to reference what Deputy Morel has just brought to our attention. He's spoken about leadership, and leadership over the past 30, 40 years, particularly in connection with matters of the environment. So I'd like to tell the Assembly that I was elected in 2005 with our current Chief Minister. We were both deputies of St Lawrence. And I really like our Chief Minister. He's an affable chap. We can chat to him on any matter, and he listens to us. If you get a sense of déjà vu, members, this is what I said really yesterday about our Environment Minister. I like them both. But where is the leadership from our current Chief Minister? I cannot believe that he stood in the Assembly this morning to say that he is going to reject Part 3 of this proposition, or Part C, to this proposition. And I'll read it so that members can be reminded of it. The Chief Minister is requested to ensure that consideration of action to tackle climate change in Jersey is included as a standing item on the agenda of the Council of Ministers. What a simple and straightforward request that is to our Chief Minister. Please include this as a standing item when your Council of Ministers meet. And he tells us that he is not going to do that because it's an administrative issue, because actually the environment is down to other members who are leading on it. The infrastructure minister, the environment minister, he may have mentioned somebody else, but surely this is the first government that has the environment as part of its strategic plan, or whatever we call it now. I'm old school, to me it will always be strategic plan. It's the first government, we've all agreed with that. It should be up there, it should be being supported by our Chief Minister and every other member of this Assembly. And yet, for administrative purposes, it is being rejected by our Chief Minister as a standing item on his agenda. I would urge him, he's with us now in the Assembly. He's smiling, sir. I think he recognises that what he said earlier is probably an error. It's a mistake. I would urge him, please, to not reject this part of the proposition, but to have it as a simple task. If there is something to report, then so be it. The entire Council of Ministers should be advised of what is happening. There's no doubt that the proposition is going to be approved as amended. But let's just reinforce to our Chief Minister, to our Council of Ministers, that we are taking this seriously and we should have it or it should be a standing item on the agenda. Okay, I think I've ticked him off enough there, sir. And I will be watching, if the proposition is voted on in separate parts, I will be watching how our Chief Minister votes. Just a couple of other things that I would like to say. And really it's based on what Deputy Morel has just said. We are all responsible for actually not putting the environment as a priority over within recent strategic plans. We must all actually, all of us who were here before this current Assembly, we should all be holding our heads in shame because we didn't include it within the strategic plan. And coming back to the proposition, who has actually brought it? It is a backbencher. We are only debating this because Deputy Ward has seen fit to bring this forward for debate. Where is the leadership? I come back to that. Where is the leadership? Why has it not been brought forward by the person who is championing the environment in this Assembly and on behalf of this island? Our Environment Minister. He has been silent on the matter. I never heard him reference it when he spoke earlier. He has spoken, trying to remember, sir, can you advise me, please, has the Environment Minister spoken in this debate?
On this debate, he has not. But no doubt he spoke very fully earlier.
No doubt he will respond, sir, as to why he has relied on a backbencher to bring this forward for debate. So Deputy Morrell mentioned, we've all failed over the past 30, 40, 50 years. The warnings were there in the 70s. And in fact, I think it must be 35 years ago at least that I was at school debating these very issues. When we were talking about the use of the motor car. It's quite an old-fashioned term, isn't it, actually? Talking about the use of the car and the impact on the environment, the damage it was doing. This was the 70s when I was at school and debating these matters. And actually, I'm in a fortunate position today to be debating it in our Parliament, in our States Assembly, and being able to influence the outcome of the vote. I will certainly be supporting the proposition as amended, and I thank Deputy Ward for bringing it to allow us to have the discussion, whilst at the same time acknowledging everything that has been said regarding the difficulty there is going to be for us all in achieving anywhere near carbon neutrality within the island. And I listened intently to what Deputy of St Martin spoke to when he actually said how hard-hitting this is likely to be. And in fact, it will be. And this is the easy part, and our difficult choices are yet to come. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? Minister.
So I have to respond to the last speaker, and but I want to start before I deal with that, because I see that as a secondary issue, is to support the whole principle of the proposition. I'm not going to go into detail, but suffice to say, I think I wholeheartedly support the views that the Deputy of St Martin has set out, and the views of Deputy Ash. These two are strongly related, is that to achieve all the actions that Deputy of St Martin outlined, which I will absolutely commit to achieving as many of those as is possible, that will require us as an Assembly to face up to the realities of the choices that are going to be coming forward to the Assembly. I think they'll start to come pretty soon, in July, in the draft government plans, in the plans that we discuss through the autumn. And I shall be, obviously, I think it's imperative that if we are to convert those goals into action, that we do so. Now, it is fair to say that it's got to be a whole Council of Ministers issue, this. And as I have, as Environment Minister, whoever holds the seat of Environment Minister under our government structures at the moment, which I think are frankly far from ideal. We're not that well equipped and well structured as a government to help us do that. And of course I do have major concerns, as members know, about the mismatch between the ministerial structure in the States of Jersey law and our civil service structures that do things differently. There is a real issue there, which can, if we don't sort that out, and it's urgent that we sort it out as a Council of Ministers, will lead to underachievement at best and at worst dysfunctionality, and I'm concerned about that. So all of us ministers do have to ensure that we do our very best to work constructively together, and the vehicles we've got to do that at the moment are the Common Strategic Policy work, which is kind of underpins the whole Council of Ministers' work. And so I as one minister with certain responsibilities will do my best to do that. But of course I can see the case for coordination. I absolutely can see where the coming together in the end, there is a purpose in reporting through to the Council of Ministers and ensuring there's a flow of information. So I think, that's rather mechanical. I don't know that I need. I mean, I asked the Assembly to trust that I have the conviction and passion in the environment to see this through. I wouldn't have put myself forward for this job. I'm not a careerist. And I think in the debate yesterday, I think it all came out, and I was absolutely delighted. I don't know that we need to go over that again. That is now our new goal. Now, why I congratulate, and I always have, Deputy Ward for bringing this forward. He was absolutely on the ball, because the first sign, I think, you asked, why didn't we react earlier? Well, I think the first sign was in October last year, 2018, the IPC International Report. The IPC updated, provided, well, I said, if Deputy Morel said 30 years ago, look, I certainly am aware of the general tendency of having importance, but when we started to see the clarity of the numbers and the increasing tone of those international reports, which I don't believe personally I've seen until that time, things started to change. And what happened in Jersey is, I believe, that was pretty strongly instrumental in the adoption of environment as one of our common strategic policies. That's the work that took place in the autumn. And of course, then what happened is that certainly there was discussion with the Low Energy Forum locally, but internationally, the theme was picked up internationally, and obviously with the young people spectacularly, and David Attenborough and something. All of this has occurred in the beginning of this year. And I congratulate David, Deputy Ward. He was absolutely foot and fast. And I'm very happy to have backbench members lead. In my ideal state's administration, I would not draw distinctions between ministers, assistant ministers, and scrutiny and others. We should all work together. I've never been a fan of this artificial structure that we have to work within. And, I suppose it does raise the issue. I can remember when we had committees when all members were in government and we did work at teams, and we were able to embrace initiatives such as Deputy Morel's as part of our structure as government and work together as a advanced thing. That is now more difficult for us. But anyway, that's a theme for another day.
I think it is, Deputy.
But nonetheless, I congratulate Deputy Ward, and as a Minister, I welcome input from other members. I talk to other members, I talk to scrutiny as much as I can, and I will carry on doing so. Because only in that way, I think, we can advance and make up for the kind of procedural issues. So, look, I'm 100% behind this, and I will be voting for it, and personally I shall be voting for Part C as well.
Sir, am I allowed to seek a point of clarification from the previous speaker?
Yes.
Sorry, sir. It is a slight procedural device, because I actually meant to seek a point of clarification from the previous speaker, but missed the opportunity, who's no longer here. Could he just, and if you can note that, could he just confirm, sir, that the principle around putting it on the agenda was not to make environment an administrative item, is purely from the point of view of making sure we have focus when the Minister brought the matters back to the Council of Ministers. Could he also note that I concur with him, and would he accept me, sir, in voting Part C as well, sir?
I'm sorry, Chief Minister, that's a separate speech. It is a device. Can I say to members that I have not heard so far anyone speak against this proposition, and I really wonder about the usefulness of continuing to debate something which it appears, perhaps with one or two exceptions, everybody agrees. I quite understand that there's a spectrum of opinion on paragraph B, and the voting on whether the amendment should be adopted shows that, but the real debate about paragraph B is going to come when the Minister carries out the process of producing the next plan, whether the policies are ambitious enough or not. And members, of course, are quite entitled to put their markers down now. But the real debate on that is going to come when that comes out. And I really wonder whether it is useful, given the agenda, and this is absolutely no derogation of the importance of the issue we've been discussing since yesterday afternoon. I wonder whether it's really useful to carry on this debate indefinitely when it's really expressing positions which are going to be taken up when the real debate comes back later on. Now, Connétable Trinity.
Deputy, your advice, sir, and I'll not say anything.
Does any other member wish to speak?
So can we just clarify that the Chief Minister was the only person in the debate to speak partially against the current motion in opposing Part C?
Right.
So it's not quite true, sir.
Well, I won't pass any judgment on which of the important parts of the proposition, but still. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Ward, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, sir, and I will be quick. I'd like to thank Deputy Young for referring to political rhetoric, because when I looked at the word rhetoric, it says the art of effective persuasive speaking or writing, especially the exploitation of figures and speech, offer compositional techniques. That's the sweetest thing you've ever said to me. Thank you very much, sir. Part one of this proposition is about setting the target for 2019. We must act now. We have 8 months to do something about this. And I would invite the Minister along to the St Helier group that is meeting. We met last night. And the positive nature of that meeting last night about coming up with solutions to make St Helier carbon neutral as quickly as we possibly can. And we have a target, but that target we'll reach as quick as we possibly can. And if we don't reach that target, then we will be accountable to it. Okay? I've got to say, I come from a profession where we're accountable for absolutely everything. So we all need to be accountable for a lot more in this chamber. So let's actually do it. So I would like you to do that, please. And you do not need to employ consultants in the way that you're saying. I object to the £300,000 figure, to be quite frank.
Through the chair, please.
Sorry?
Through the chair, please.
Sorry, sir.
The Minister does not.
Sorry, sir. I do not believe that we need to employ consultants. We have knowledge on this island. Talk to the people who are outside. Talk to the people on this island who know about Jersey, know about its environment, and are willing to take some action. We have people who are environmental planners. We have people who are ecologists, biologists. We have the lot there if you want to use them. And they are specific to this island, sir, and that's what we need to use. In terms of Part B, well, I'd like to, a musical quote that will split the Assembly. I'll quote Meatloaf. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, you know. And that's okay for me. I'm disappointed in B, but I will be holding you to account. I don't think fiscal measures are enough. I think the whole of the Council of Ministers needs to take responsibility. Just as we are a corporate parent, we are a corporate parent to our climate and our environment, and we all need to take that into account when we look at this. In Part C, I would like to give, so if I may, offer the Chief Minister a way out, and a way out of this, which is to do something very simple. Invite young people to the Council of Ministers chamber when you have that on your standing item and talk to them. Because I heard some of the climate activists on a Friday out there speak eloquently, intelligently, with well-researched ideas, and we need to be listening to them. If we are genuinely going to be a transparent government and listen to children and put them first, let's listen to them, because it is their future. And that would be such a positive thing for us to do. And it would actually say to young people that actually politics is something you can be involved in and you will be listened to. So there you go. That's what you do with Part C of this proposition, a practical outcome to it. This has brought people together. It's remarkable. The Constable of St Lawrence accepting something from a Reform member. It's lovely to see and quite remarkable. And the most remarkable thing is Deputy Southern agreeing with Deputy Ash. Well, I didn't think we'd ever see that. But there you go. I will say a couple of things I must say, actually, which is very important. The worry that ministers don't have enough officer support to get this done. Well, I'm really sorry, but backbenchers have absolutely zero support for anything that we're doing. And when we want to bring propositions, we don't even have the resources to sit anywhere and do them. So something needs to be done if we're going to genuinely address a government that's going to be thinking through and actually achieving the actions that we want. I make no apology for having passion in what I believe. I think it's very, very important that we have that passion, and that will continue because this is such an important topic. And I would say to everybody here and everybody outside and everybody listening, yes, it is about what we do individually. And once you start to look at this, and if there's a genuine leadership from the government about climate change, we do start to consider our own actions. We start to think about whether we need to have that car, whether we need to eat in the way that we do, or whether other options are available, and we start to change. And once you make that change, it's a steamroll effect, and we all start to improve our lives. And I would say you don't have to be frightened of change. It's 2019.
Embrace it, enjoy it. It's much better to be on the right side of history than on the wrong side. And all of the economic worries that we have, the biggest economic worry that we have in this assembly is uncontrolled climate change, because that will change everything. And you will not be able to buy your way out of that. You will not be able to economically adjust or fiscally lever your way out of that. So we need to act now, and we need to take genuine, positive action in order to make the changes that are there. And I would say we can prove to the people of Jersey that we can lead, and we desperately need to do that. I'm fed up with being seen as the phrase politician being a bad word. I don't want that to happen. If we lead the way on this topic, we can lead the way on others, we can make the change that is needed, we can change the lives of young people, and we can change the lives for the future of this island. So I urge you to accept, and I would like to take the whole proposition together, accept all three parts as amended, and I call for the appel. Thank you.
The appel is called for. The vote is on P27, Climate Change Emergency, actions to be taken by the Government of Jersey, as amended. It is one vote on paragraphs A, B and C, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members had the opportunity of voting, I ask the greffier to close the voting. Can announce that the proposition has been adopted. 40 votes in favour, 1 vote against.
Who's the one vote?
Senator Ferguson voted contre.
Before we come to the next item on the agenda, I was asked yesterday afternoon in the course of this debate, and I left it over because I didn't want to interrupt the debate, for a formal ruling and a point of order. This was raised by Deputy Doublé. Do you still wish me to deal with that? The point of order that Deputy Doublé raised arises out of the exchange which members may recall between her and the Assistant Treasury Minister over whether Bowyer discriminated against non-Catholics. And Deputy Doublé asked me to rule as a point of order that the Assistant Treasury Minister was inadvertently misleading the Assembly, as the school's publicly available admissions criteria lists baptised Catholic children in priority to children of other faiths or of no faith. Deputy Doublé was anxious to emphasise in requesting the point of order that she's not asserting it was unlawful discrimination, but she did believe that it fits the definition of lawful discrimination, and therefore the Assistant Minister had misled the Assembly. It is true that I listened to the Hansard again, not the Hansard, to the whatever it's called, this job, last night, and it is true that the Assistant Minister did say that Bowyer did not discriminate against non-Catholics. When Deputy Doublé raised the objection, he then said straight away that the school may take Catholic families first, but it does not. But it does have, and he emphasised does, a substantial number of non-Catholic families, and it would be wrong to make this a faith issue. In my judgment, this was not a matter which was central to the debate itself, although, having said that, I can well see that the admissions criteria are a matter on which some people might think that was discriminatory and others not, given the statement which the Assistant Treasury Minister has made. The question for me is a narrow one as to whether he was seeking to mislead the Assembly. I don't believe he was, and therefore I do not make any order in that connection. I think this is a matter of people's judgment as to whether it amounts to lawful discrimination or not, and I understand the context in which the Assistant Treasury Minister said what he did, which was that he did not think that the debate gave rise to a faith issue. That was a matter on which people may have different views, but he was entitled to say that.
Thank you, sir. Can I just make it clear? I did say I thought the Minister was inadvertently misleading.
Yes.
I know that he would never seek to mislead the Assembly.
I'm sorry if I didn't emphasise that, yes.
So could I ask, just for the record, I think it's relevant, would the Deputy state whether she felt misled and whether she would have voted differently had that comment not been made? That seems to be the most... Would the Deputy have voted differently had that not been said? That seems a test, because it seems to me, sir, that in the future there are all sorts of things that get said in the Assembly inadvertently which might be factually incorrect, and we wouldn't want you reporting on those every time. So it might seem that in cases where somebody feels misled and would have voted differently, that's perhaps the right type of bar to use in future.
And I think that's a subjective approach, Deputy, which I don't think would be right, because it would give rise to all sorts of difficulties in the future if that were to be the test which is to be applied. It's an objective assessment which has to be made. Right, we now come to P29, which is draft amendment number 39 to the Standing Orders of the State of Jersey, lodged by Senator Farnham. Ask the graphier to read the citation of the draft.
Draft Amendment number 39 of the Standing Orders of the States of Jersey. The States, under Article 48 of the States of Jersey Law 2005, make the following amendment to the Standing Orders of the States of Jersey.
Senator.
Thank you, sir. For the avoidance of doubt, this proposition is being tabled to encourage change. It's been tabled, sir, to enable reform, to force members to work together collectively and thoughtfully, to blend their views together with the interests of all islanders into properly considered, sustainable reform of our political system and the Constitution of the States of Jersey. In my report, sir, I make reference to the practices of a number of other countries and jurisdictions in relation to what is required to change their own constitutional arrangements. And that terminology, sir, should not be confused with their own constitution of the States Assembly, as set out in Part 2 of the States of Jersey law. Notwithstanding that, many countries and jurisdictions, large and small, have supermajorities built into their criteria for approval, for democratic reform, and amendments to the make-up of their legislatures, and many have a threshold consistent with the 2/3 that I am proposing today. What I am asking for is by no means extraordinary or undemocratic, and is common practice in many other places. To leave such important changes, sir, to be approved by potentially just one vote of a simple majority, 25 to 24, in our case, in this Assembly, which directly impacts upon the fundamentals of how islanders are represented, how their interests are protected, or how they can vote, would, in my opinion, completely undermine the importance of this subject. To be absolutely clear, sir, this amendment to the Standing Orders of the States of Jersey changes the number of votes that are required under Standing Order 89A for a proposition to be adopted that A, alters in any way the membership of the states, B, lengthens or shortens the term of office of any class of elected member, or C, sir, alters, adds or extinguishes the constituencies of any class of elected member, so that any such proposition shall not be adopted unless at least 32 members of the states vote in favour of it. As a new, modern and more representative assembly, which I believe we are, it is likely that we will soon be called upon to deliberate over propositions brought by states committees and members on important issues that will impact upon the make-up and constitution of the States Assembly and our electoral system. And since writing that short paragraph, sir, we have had no fewer than three such propositions with amendments and the prospects of more to come. And I know that some members, sir, will think or say that this proposition is an attempt to prevent reform, when in actual fact, it's just the opposite. And I say that, sir, because having endured, yes, we have endured over 50 attempts since the publication of Clothier on such matters, with the only notable outcome being that we have managed to reduce the number of members elected by island-wide mandate, arguably the most democratically elected office in this Assembly, from 12 to 8. That's pretty much what we've achieved with a simple majority. And it's probably worth reminding members, sir, that that was done without the knowledge or the permission of the electorate, and was, if my memory serves me correctly, largely to facilitate the move to a single election day, because it was deemed that the electorate were not capable of voting for 12 senators on one ballot paper. Guernsey might disagree, sir, as they will shortly be electing all of their 38 members on an island-wide vote on a single ballot at their next elections. And that will be an exercise worth observing. It is clear, sir, that efforts to reform have simply failed under the current system, because with a simple majority, there is always a slim chance of scraping something through. And this means that there is no collective thinking required, by which I mean collective, as in the whole, or at least most of the Assembly being involved with working up such ideas. There is no incentive to work together to find a consensus. There is no necessity to work together, and this has led to a myriad of disparate propositions that we've seen in the past, and we are likely to see in the future. And the bringing back, time after time after time, of the same ones, or very similar ones. Any change to the democratic rights of the individual is significant and will be of relevance to all islanders. And this is confirmed by the Mori poll, outlined in my report, sir, conducted by the former Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel in 2017. It would therefore not be satisfactory for a proposition to be passed, perhaps just after 4 weeks' notice, on a simple majority, or by perhaps a single vote. As such an outcome would surely deepen the low regard in which this Assembly is held when it comes to matters of reform. Because with a simple majority on such matters, it is highly likely that the result would not be representative or reflective of the electorate's views. I refer to the Privileges and Procedures Committee's proposition, forthcoming proposition, which seeks to remove constables from the Assembly, amongst other changes, by automatic right, their membership, sir, by automatic right. Notwithstanding, sir, the strong desire to retain the constables as reflected in the 2014 referendum result. I'm also tempted, sir, to refer to the process followed by the UK in relation to Brexit, which was won by a wafer-thin majority, and reflect upon the impact that such a process can have on such a monumental decision. One thing that must also be made very clear is that these are matters of substance and of great importance for current and, importantly, future generations. The decisions we make today in this Assembly will alter the democratic rights of all individuals and will dictate how islanders are democratically represented and governed long after the current membership has moved on. And I therefore believe that a far more considered and consensual approach is essential to ensure that we introduce the change that is in the very best long-term interests of our island. This proposition, if approved, will force members to work harder in a more considered and collaborative manner. It will force members to work together to search for solutions, for the reform necessary to ensure that we maintain a modern, well-respected, secure and stable democracy. And look what happens when we do work together to find common ground. And there are some good examples of that. Most recently, sir, I'll use the example of P18, the Draft Commissioner for Children and Young People Jersey Law, debated on Tuesday. Seems such a long time ago now already. That was a great example of this Assembly working together when there was a difference of opinions between the Minister, the Government, the Assembly, and what happened, and scrutiny, and what happened? Everybody got together and they came up with a compromise. It wasn't perfect, but it was a good compromise, and it allowed progress. And when that does happen, we normally get those propositions through unanimously. And wouldn't that be good for us all to work together collectively on a proposition to reform our Assembly? And it might not, none of us might think it's perfect, but as they say, the enemy of a good plan is the dream of a perfect plan. And some of us, most of us, would have to give ground on certain aspects, but we would move forward. Wouldn't that be an achievement? Because reform is something that will be evolutionary. It's not something we can do year by year and chop and change on the whim of a member or a group of members who think they've got a chance of scraping something through, depending on the makeup of this Assembly at the time. These things have to be based, sir, on maintaining our stability. Jersey is renowned for its secure and stable political system. Our past success was, and our future is, dependent on that. And at this time of significant external threats and uncertainty, it is more important than ever to maintain that stability. Simply put, sir, it's time to put the interests of all islanders and future generations before our own personal interests and our own political agendas. And to that end, sir, I respectfully ask members to support this proposition. Thank you.
Proposition seconded? It is second. Thank you. Very well. Call on Deputy Levy, Chairman of BBC.
Sorry, sir, if I may just pause, I was wondering if I could ask for a clarification of the Solicitor General, just because it's kind of fundamental about the argument that the Senator is trying to make.
What, do you object, Chairman?
It's okay. Sorry.
Yes,
sorry, sir. It's the proposition asks us to amend standing orders effectively for aspects which are the makeup of the states and the people who come together in the states chamber. So in that sense, it's asking us to change the constitution of the States Assembly. But in his report and in the argument just presented by the Senator, he likens this to likens his points to the national constitutions of Albania, the USA, Estonia, various others. And I just wanted to understand, because in my head, I'm vexed by this, have been for a while, that there is this fundamental difference between the constitution of the States Assembly and the constitution of a state and the nation. And I was trying to understand and have clarification of whether there is a difference. And if so, I'd be grateful for that. Thank you, sir.
Well, sir, it's correct that Jersey is not a nation state, but nevertheless, it has its own democratically elected assembly, and it has its own law, which has been approved by Her Majesty in Council, which governs the constitution of that assembly. Like the UK, and not those other jurisdictions that are mentioned in the Senator's proposition, but like the UK, Jersey doesn't have a written constitution. But that does not mean, in my view, that a change to its the standing orders which deal with constitutional matters is not a constitutional issue. In my view, it is. In my view, if one looks at the States of Jersey law, that is, perhaps not all of it, but pretty much most of it is a constitutional statute. And in the UK, I'm aware of case law. Whilst the UK doesn't have a written constitution, I'm aware of case law, which I'm not sure it's necessary to go into for the present purposes, but I'm aware of case law where the court has found that a particular statute in the UK, despite it not having a written constitution, but a particular statute is a constitutional statute. And applying the reasoning of the court from those English cases and looking at the States of Jersey law, and if one looks at, for example, say the preamble and the long title to the States of Jersey law, I think it's pretty clear that it is a constitutional statute applying the reasoning of the courts from England and Wales. So the long title of the States of Jersey law, it says that it's a law regarding the constitution and proceedings of the states to declare and define the powers, privileges and immunities of the states and to establish a ministerial system of government. And then the preamble goes on and says, whereas it's recognised that Jersey has autonomous capacity in domestic affairs, it's further recognised that there's an increasing need for Jersey to participate in matters of international affairs. And whereas Jersey wishes to enhance and promote democratic, accountable and responsive governance in the island and implement fair, effective and efficient policies in accordance with international principles of human rights. Now, in my view, sir, and if one goes on to look at the remainder of law, which I'm not sure it's necessary to do so for present purposes, but certainly applying the reasoning of courts from England and Wales, looking at the States of Jersey law, in my view, it is a constitutional statute. So, in terms of amending the procedures of the States Assembly, which are, after all, established pursuant to the States of Jersey law, it's entirely open for the Assembly to amend its constitution. This is a constitutional issue.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Chair.
Sir, could I ask a follow-up question from what the Solicitor General has just told us? Sir?
Yeah.
If the States of Jersey law is considered our constitution, would by passing this amendment mean that any future changes to the States of Jersey law need a supermajority?
I didn't say that it was our constitution. I said it was a constitutional statute. And it follows from that that not every change to the States of Jersey law is necessarily a constitutional issue, because, for example, there are, say, take the offences in the States of Jersey law. There's an offence, I think, for publishing false material, which has a statutory tariff of up to 3 years imprisonment, term of imprisonment. And if, for example, the states wanted to amend that to 5 years, it doesn't seem to me as though that's a constitutional issue. But what, as I understand, the proposition is doing is limiting the effect of this amendment so that one reads, it changes Article 89(1)A of Standing Orders and leaves 89(1)(2) in place. so that it's saying that only changes which alter in any way the membership of the states, lengthens or shortens the term of office of any class of elected member, or alters, adds or extinguishes the constituencies of any elected member. So it's only saying that it applies to those. Well, in other words, that the existing 89A2 of standing orders remains in place.
Right. I call on Deputy Labby.
Thank you, sir, and I'm sure we're all grateful to the Solicitor General for that. And of course, the words constitutional and unconstitutional are bandied about in this chamber very often without a full understanding, because a constitution, how something is made up, how it's completed, how it's assembled, is something which the Solicitor General has described and something which the Assembly is at liberty to amend as it chooses. A constitution in the sense of the United States of America, for example, which begins with three very important words, probably the three most important words on any statute in the United States, and I wonder if the Senator who's proposing this proposition knows what those words are. We, the people, because the Constitution in a United States context sets out the people's rights, and that is why any change to that Constitution has to go back to the people to be changed. We don't have that. We don't have anything approaching that, and it's important that people recognise that distinction. So the Senator's proposition provokes timely reflection on the reckless abandonment, the dangerous, radical decisiveness that has characterised this Assembly's decision-making over the last 50 years. He calls for a period of calm stagnation, perhaps appropriately, for a period where we can maintain and preserve in political aspect our idyllic status quo. And if those scenarios chime with any members of this Assembly, then they must vote with Senator Farnham. Whilst they're doing so, they might perhaps explain to us all about the parallel universe that they've been living in over the last half century. Because as we know, that is not the picture. It would be a shame, wouldn't it, if this debate was to turn into a debate on the latest set of electoral reform proposals that are before us and will be debated in the coming months. Because that is not what this... clearly, they played a part in spurring the Senator to bring this proposition. I mean, I think that's nakedly obvious. But it isn't right to debate that proposition now, is it, sir? We're talking about whether we should have a two-thirds majority before changing anything. I think this comes at completely the wrong time and is completely misjudged. And as Mr. Miller of Radio Jersey summed up so perfectly this morning on the radio, there is a feeling in this Assembly that transcends political colours, that transcends whether one's in the executive or whether one is a backbencher. That zeitgeist, if I might call it that, is about the assault coming from all sides on the sovereignty of this Assembly. Sometimes that assault comes from within. If the executive doesn't enact a proposition that this Assembly has passed. Sometimes I think members are feeling that assault is of our own making in terms of the structures now in place for the administration of the island and the effect that is having on both the executive and decision-making and information in this Assembly. And there is constant assault on the integrity of the sovereignty of this Assembly from all quarters. And members, I feel, are waking up to that and are flexing their muscles and allowing the Assembly to start to flex its muscles. And this is coming at exactly the right time. And this is really important for this Assembly, I believe, principally important for this Assembly to grasp its own sovereignty, the importance of what we do here, and the democratic implications of what we do. And everything we do in this Assembly is a response to the people who put us here. And it's time that the Assembly did wake up and did flex its muscles and assert its sovereignty, because we're on a rocky, dangerous road, in my opinion. So this runs contrary to that, because what Senator Farnham is doing is diluting the power of members, individual members. And it's actually an insult to, unwittingly, it's an insult to members, and more importantly, to the people who put members here, to say that a majority of members is not enough. A simple majority of members is not enough for something to pass through this Assembly. It absolutely is. It absolutely must be. That is democracy. If we had a system, if we had a political constitution, a political system that was as near to perfect as we could get, there just might be some merit in Senator Farnham's proposition. But we don't have that. And whether members agree with the proposals before them from PPC that we'll be debating in 2 or 3 months or longer, whether they agree with that or not, I think there is a general agreement that our system does need some reform. And most of the important propositions on electoral reform have come to the Assembly as a direct response to learned advice that we have commissioned, either from important QCs like Sir Cecil Clothier. No, he wasn't a QC, he was an important former civil servant, wasn't a diplomat, but an important, learned, well-considered commission that was set up in terms of the Clothier Commission, with lay members of the island on that commission too, and the blueprint that provided in 1999 or 2000, that still, the shadow of that still hangs over the Assembly, and that informed, of course, the electoral reform debates that immediately followed it. And similarly with the PPC proposals, they are a direct response to, again, experts that were invited here by the Assembly and paid for to come and look at our system and tell us where we're going wrong. And their verdict that the fact that we don't have a sensible voter equity and voter equality, and that we have problems in terms of a low voter turnout and the fact that so many members return to the Assembly without facing a contest. All of that, they say, undermines the principles that democracy in Jersey, that elections in Jersey are fully genuine. So that is not the time, is it? Whether you agree with that or not, that is not the time to suggest we put the brakes on any kind of reform. And what this will do, obviously, it will prevent any progress in that respect. It will prevent that. It is very, very hard, as I am finding out, to reach a consensus. PPC has been working hard to do that. I mean, I went as chairman of PPC. I asked myself to be invited to the Council of Ministers to discuss this, the latest reform proposals, and it was a very rough ride for me. It was very heated at times, and I know one particular member there was forced to come see me afterwards and say and apologise, and I said it's absolutely no problem. Emotions run high with this, And I did say at the end of that meeting, there is no point in telling me what you don't like about the reform proposals that I'm bringing to you. What is important is that you tell me how you would respond to the latest set of advice from the electoral observers that we've received. Don't just, it's very easy to pick on the thing that you dislike most about something and say that destroys the whole concept. Don't tell me that. Tell me what you would do. Tell me what reform you would do. And Senator Farnham won't mind me saying that, in his summation, he said, well, I like the senators, I like the deputies, I like the constables. So he does
some of them, sir.
The categories. So
Chairman, come back to the proposition, please.
yes, of course. Sorry, I asked for that, I'm sure. This would be a dangerous and ludicrous thing to do at this time, and members must reject this proposition.
So could I have a point of clarification? The chairman started by saying, we the people, as part of the American Constitution. Does this mean that he endorses that changes should be subject to a referendum?
It depends what changes those are, sir.
I call on Senator Ferguson. Senator, before you speak, Chairman, can I just correct you? Sir Cecil Clothier was in fact QC. Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, sir. I think we ought to go back to the beginning. Why did the states in 1948 not follow slavishly the Westminster model? Looking at the structure of the states as it was, or as it was decided, we ended up with senators for 6 years, half of them elected at each election. And it's obvious from this, well, it's apparent anyway, that they used the United States model. And interestingly, as you will note from the report, the states require, I'll try and distinguish between the states and the United States. All right, the Americans require a 2/3 majority to change the Constitution. Now, I know Clothier gets sort of held up for us, but Clothier was working to the Westminster model as adapted by the EU and was looking at the structure of a district assembly, a county assembly, which is very much the Westminster model. And we're looking at something that was influenced by the American model. The House of Representatives, for instance, is re-elected every 2 years, and the number of congressmen per state is proportional to the size of the population. So you get an equality of votes. However, the senators, there are 2 senators per state, and it doesn't matter if it's Rhode Island, California, Iowa, Idaho, you name it. There are 2 senators, a junior and a senior. And 1/3 of all senators are re-elected every 2 years, which ensures continuity. And this is what we used to have with the way we were dealing with our senators. We had a very much more stable government because half the senators had the experience, so we could hit the ground running. As an interesting sort of postscript, sir, congressmen have to be 25 years or older, so that'll rule out some people, and senators will have to be 30 years or older, and that'll rule out some other people. So I wonder why Deputy Labby hasn't actually included that particular little stricture. Oh, I'm sorry that Deputy Labby isn't in the Assembly. But perhaps his Vice Chairman would note it to add to his reform proposition. I mean, basically, what I'm saying is that...
excuse me, Senator, we're about to go in core 8.
You mean I can have 2 speeches, sir?
Well, you wouldn't be the first, but I think you may now continue.
Thank you, sir. So, I mean, basically, you know, we've got to stop looking at this in the Westminster model. You know, the Westminster model, as we've all seen for the last 3 or 4 months over the Brexit debacle, it's a good word that Deputy Morell came up with. I'm sorry he's not here to hear me pick it up. But anyway, I'm not sure that Westminster is probably the best model in the world to follow. I happen to like the American approach, and I would ask, I agree with this particular proposition, and I'd actually ask the PPC to go back and just look at this, the whole reform, in light of what our forefathers in 1948 had in mind when they reformed the states after the war. Thank you, sir.
I call on Constable St Martin.
I will be supporting this amendment on the grounds that the need for a constitutional change to the island must be delivered with the maximum confidence of the Assembly. We should not and cannot sustain the idea that fundamentally transformative policies should be passed by the narrowest of majorities. I would just like to say that Deputy Labby is a brilliant speaker. He's a very good raconteur. And I would also like to say that we have listened to the people. We've had referendums where the public's wishes have been firmly to keep the constables and have the bailiff remain in power. And these public's wishes are being blatantly ignored. So please don't tell me that voting for this amendment is going against the public. Deputy Labby says that we need to listen to the people, but if a referendum does not suit certain members, we are then ignoring the people. Maybe others are living in a parallel universe, but I am firmly in this one. I listen to constituents and parishioners and a wide selection of ages and affiliations, and they see merit in this proposition. They really do. So again, I will be supporting this amendment, and I will restate it on the grounds of the need for constitutional change to the island must be delivered with the maximum confidence of the Assembly, and we should not and cannot sustain the idea that fundamentally transformative policies should be passed by the narrowest of majorities. I am happy to support Senator Farnham's amendment, and I urge others to do so. Thank you.
Any other one wish to speak? Dr. Wickenden.
So I thought I must. It was a very nice speech by the Senator on opening this up. It was great. This is here to enable change. We've had 50 propositions that have tried to change this Assembly in the current system, which is just a majority, that have failed. And that's not good enough. Let's make it harder. Let's make it a super majority because they haven't got through anyway. You know, it's already a very, very hard thing to do in this Assembly, which is to make an argument for change. It's not an assembly of change here, or progression. Okay, a supermajority, let's all work together. Let's collaborate more, work together to get things done. Should we do this too for the government plan, the strategic plan? Things that tax our islanders, should that not be a supermajority as well? Would the Senator, in his summing up, say whether he would support a change to standing orders to make serious government proposition changes have to be a supermajority because we can all work together better in that way? Would the Senator support that? Should it not, if we're going to change the taxes for the people of this island, not be something that should be a supermajority as well? Should the government plan on how we're going to spend money and the public finances law on how we're going to spend that money, should that not be a supermajority as well? If we're going to go down a route of saying, this is a good thing, if we want to do a supermajority in voting, let's do it for the stuff that really matter to the people of this island. Why not? I'm sure that would not be supported by the Council of Ministers to put anything that they want to do as make it more difficult, more inclusive, should I say, as the Senator's words. I think this is a wrecking motion to stop change. I think this is a Senator who is scared that in this current Assembly it's more likely that change may happen, and he is scared, the Senator is scared that he hasn't got the power of conviction to make the argument strong enough to get his majority, just a majority. Therefore, let's make it harder for everyone else. There's fear in this proposition. There is not inspirational change, there is fear. It should be wrong. I'm not voting for this, and I don't ask other people to either.
Thanks, sir. I'm loath to contribute in this debate, frankly, because I would hope that it would be a fairly quick rejection from this Assembly because of what it's seeking to do. The Senator says in his report and in his speech that this is a proposition which somehow exists to enable and facilitate change, when it's got to be quite obvious that actually it will achieve the precise opposite. I completely agreed with what the Constable of St Martin said about taking the public with us and how change has got to reflect what they want. But what this will do, because this I think goes conversely against what the Constable was saying, what this will do is it will give a veto to the minority. It will say that even when there's 31 members of this Assembly supporting change, then a minority can veto it. That must surely be wrong, especially when that minority themselves may be completely divided upon what they think the actual solution is. That, I don't think by any stretch of the English language can be described as democratic. And I think it comes from a place that misunderstands what a constitutional issue in Jersey actually is. The report lists several countries that have government systems which are completely different to that which we have in Jersey. The American system is vastly different to what we're used to in Commonwealth jurisdictions. They have a constitution where you have to go through a very convoluted process to change these rules, whereas Jersey has an unwritten constitution. And I thought what the Solicitor General said before about the distinction between what is the Constitution and what is a constitutional statute, something I think we would all do well from considering a bit more to help understand these issues. It's not just the States of Jersey law which could be called a constitutional statute. The Jersey Human Rights Law is a constitutional statute, a law that enshrines the ECHR in Jersey and gives us rights such as the right to life, the right to privacy, the right to take part in free and fair elections, the right to have an independent judiciary from which to get justice. I asked the Solicitor General for a bit of advice just now about where the definition of a constitutional statute would come from, or more specifically when there is a statute which has some issues in it which are constitutional and some which aren't, because there are large swathes of the States of Jersey 2005 law which are not constitutional in nature. I asked him to provide me with an authority that would help explain what criteria you have to fulfill for something to be constitutional. And the authority comes from the case of Thoburn versus the Sunderland City Council from 2002, which as Part A and Part B, to help us get to what is a constitutional statute. Part A is something that conditions the legal relationship between citizen and state in some general overarching manner. And Part B, something that enlarges or diminishes the scope of what we would now regard as fundamental constitutional rights. Well, sir, it's obvious that having the right to vote is a constitutional right. It's one that is enshrined in Jersey law, in European human rights law. But what does your vote look like? If we were to say, for example, talk about the parish of St Clement, which is currently underrepresented in the States. If you were doing it by population, it should have 3 deputies rather than 2. If we were to bring a proposition that left everything else unchanged but said St Clement should have 3 deputies, is that a constitutional issue? And the answer is no, it is not, because it doesn't do what is referred to in Thoburn versus Sunderland City Council, which conditions the legal relationship between the citizen and state in some general overarching manner, because that relationship between a parishioner in St Clement and the States of Jersey would remain identical. The only difference is that they'd have 3 votes instead of 2. The difference between 2 votes and 3 votes is not the same as the difference between having no votes and 1 vote. That is the distinction. That is when it would become a constitutional issue, in my view. The fact, sir, is that we have had, as the Senator said, 50 attempts to change parts of the States of Jersey law which have failed, and he says we need to come together and act collectively with some collective thinking, as if this is somehow a new idea. Has nobody thought of that before? Well, of course they have. I served on the Privileges and Procedures Committee in the last Assembly, where we tried desperately to bring a proposition to reform the composition of this Assembly. And that was very much an exercise of collective thinking. You had both myself and Senator Philip Ouzef on a committee. You don't get more collective than that, frankly. And it reached a process where we simply couldn't agree, so nothing came forward. It wasn't that people didn't approach it the right way, because we certainly did. We put our differences aside. We attempted to compromise. My views on issues of the composition of the states are well known. I don't support, I'm sorry to say, the constables remaining in this Assembly, but I have voted for propositions in the past that have kept constables in the Assembly as my attempt to compromise and say, well, as long as there's progress in other areas, I'm happy to do that. But even still, this Assembly couldn't, by simple majority, in the end, bring a proposal forward to be enacted in time for the last election, even though the one that was on the table was about as modest an attempt at reform as it's possible to get in terms of how it sought to change the constituencies. So, sir, it's my contention that Schedule 1 of the States of Jersey 2005 law cannot be considered, in my view, a constitutional schedule, because it doesn't change the relationship between a citizen and a state. It simply alters the practicalities in that, whether somebody has 2 votes because they live in this parish or whether they have 3 votes because they live in this parish. The relationship is fundamentally the same. You still take part in an election. You still have people represent you. And the job that those representatives have when they sit in this Assembly remains completely unchanged. If we change Schedule 1 of the States of Jersey law, the job of the States of Jersey is not changed at all. We're still the lawmaking body of the island. We still appoint the executive. Everything remains completely unchanged, and that relationship between the public and our institutions is the same. And so I don't think it can be considered a constitutional issue for that reason. And of course, there have been quite drastic changes that have been made to Jersey's constitution, arguably, over the years, the human rights law being one of those. That didn't require a 2/3 majority. That didn't go to referendum. So what I say to states members is that I hope we can accept that actually this is an attempt to make it harder to achieve reform, whether it's coming from a good place or not, when actually there is a desire for change out there, and if that change is to be more modest than many people would like it to be, then we should at least try and get a majority of people on board. And to say that 31 members can support something, but a minority can oppose it, in fact, when this Assembly doesn't have full attendance, it could end up being a very, very small handful of people that could prevent change. That can't be described as democracy. So since this would have, I think, a negative impact on us working together to try and achieve change and try and better represent the people who put us in this Assembly, I would urge members to reject this proposition.
Deputy Guida.
So, it's funny that with this proposition we have stopped talking about referenda. One of the first large debates that we've had since we were all elected was about such a referendum. And I had to go back home and actually read the Hansard because of the things I heard about how they were not very important. Why would you ask the people? Why would the people understand this? And we ended up in a very important question, which could have been solved with a referendum. by saying, no, we really don't want a referendum, we'll just set this aside. How can we talk about representativity when we can actually physically ask everybody in the island, we set it aside and say, no, we're representative, we're going to vote, and that's fine, and we don't need to ask the people. If any question like this arises, do ask the people. If we're in doubt, if we're 25 to 24, do ask the people. You will get an answer. You'll get a definitive answer. Why don't we use that? I don't understand it. And certainly, if we say it's expensive, it takes time, it's difficult, in that case, make sure that the decision taken in this assembly is an absolute majority. If 2/3 of us agree on something, we can estimate that the people in general, all the people in the island, will agree as well. And if we're unsure, or if you're trying to push something and you feel that there is a blocking minority here, put it to the people. It should be easy to ask for a referendum. They're going to be cheaper and cheaper, and I think our communication with the rest of the island should be improved. I will be voting for this proposition.
Before I call on the next speaker, can I say to members who are outside listening to the debate that we are on the absolute minimum for being quorum, for being quorate, and it would be helpful if some members would return to the Assembly, as there may be those present who might need to go out shortly. Deputy St. Wall.
Thank you, sir. And if I may, I'd like to ask a question of the Solicitor General. And it follows on...
I'm sorry, are you making a speech or asking a question or both?
Well, no, I would like to ask a question first, sir.
Yes, fine.
I would like to explain my thoughts in the question. It is a question, sir, and it follows on from the advice given some minutes ago by the Solicitor General around the States of Jersey Law 2005, which I think he told us was a constitutional statute, and which I note was approved by Her Majesty in Council, as it would have to be. And I've just looked up the preamble to that law, which states that it is a law regarding the constitution and proceedings of the states to declare and define the powers, privileges, and immunities of the states. And under that law, the states were given power to make standing orders. So my question to the Solicitor General would be, what is the status of the standing orders made under the law? Do they have capacity to make an amendment of the nature requested by Senator Farnham, which would appear to me to make changes to the Constitution? And if they can make that amendment, can or should such a change be made without reference to Her Majesty in Council? And I note that Article 48 of the law relates to standing orders, and Article 48(1) says the state shall make standing orders to give effect to this law, and I emphasize the words to give effect, and to regulate their proceedings and businesses. And I think of the word regulate, and so my question is, can standing orders go further than giving effect to what is already in the law? And can they go further than regulating pure proceedings and business? Because what follows in Article 48 is just a long list of requirements that the states establish committees such as PPC, a planning committee, and establishes a scrutiny process. There's nothing in that article that suggests to me that standing orders can be used to make what would appear to be a constitutional amendment. And therefore, in summary, my question is this a proper procedural way of making the amendment sought by Senator Farnham, or are standing orders much more limited? Right.
Deputy, can you make plain to the Solicitor General what you say is the constitutional amendment? Because this, from the Chair, I can say that my construction of this proposition is that it changes the numbers, but it's no different in principle for what's in Standing Order 89A at the moment.
Yes, I had thought of that, sir, but I would perhaps even begin to question the capacity to create that supermajority within standing orders, because it does alter the powers of this assembly. It does alter the voting rights of members, that a certain majority has to be achieved. So the proposer has set forth in his report to the proposition the constitutions of other countries in which it is written into their constitutions that certain supermajorities must be established. And can we do that by standing orders?
Solicitor General.
I entirely accept that's a valid question to ask. It may be that I could benefit from a bit more time to reflect on it, but my immediate reaction is that the States of Jersey law was one that was approved by Her Majesty in Council, and it expressly states in the preamble to the law that it's recognised that Jersey has autonomous capacity in domestic affairs, and that it is a law and it's one which Jersey wishes to enhance and promote democratic, accountable and responsive governments in the island, and implement fair, effective and efficient policies in accordance with international principles of human rights. Now, this amendment is to standing orders. Standing orders are a matter for this assembly. Now, who better is to decide what is in the interests of the people of this island than this assembly? So I would say that this assembly has power. It's in its own hands to decide what its arrangements are to be in relation to standing orders. There doesn't seem, I know the language that the deputy cited, but in my view, overall, there doesn't seem to be anything that that is offensive or would limit the power of this assembly to decide how best to govern its arrangements as regards votes. Now, is it offensive from a human rights perspective to do that? That is an important consideration that we would need to bear in mind. But I don't think that my immediate reaction is I don't think that there's anything offensive from a human rights perspective in the amendment that's proposed. So I think whilst I'm very happy to reflect on the Deputy's question further, the fact is that it seems to me that the States of Jersey law is one where it is expressly envisaged that the States Assembly has autonomous capacity in domestic affairs. Now, this is clearly one of domestic affairs. The only consideration that it seems to me that might limit that is one of fundamental human rights. And as I say, I don't see anything in the amendment that's proposed that is objectionable from a human rights perspective. But I think that's the best I can do in terms of my immediate reaction to the Deputy's question.
So, Deputy, do you now wish to speak?
Can I perhaps reserve my position in case the Solicitor General chooses to come back, having reflected, as he said he may. If I'm,
so you don't wish to speak?
Perhaps not at this stage, sir.
Constable St. Peter.
Thank you, sir. I may not be able to speak as eloquently as some of my colleagues. However, I will support this proposition, having spoken to a number of parishioners who have urged me to do so. We talk of the will of the people, but following a number of referendums over the years, we have failed to we have totally ignored the will of the people on occasions. I recently had the privilege of meeting the Swiss ambassador to the UK, and I was impressed with his understanding of our government and constitution, something that he felt we should not change. And he explained to me the parallels with their own system of government, with the cantons effectively being similar to our parishes. And although they have a number of different houses within their government, the Council of State, which is one of the main bodies, actually only has 2 representatives for each canton, no matter how large the canton is and how many voters they have. So I could see how he saw the parallels with our own system. However, the Swiss also require a double majority for any constitutional change. And how do they achieve this? They don't achieve it by a 3/4 majority or 2/3 majority. They have to have a referendum of all the Swiss voters, and there has to be a majority, and that is legally binding. And then that is followed by a vote from the canton representatives. And unless both agree, the constitutional change cannot be made. If we had this sort of protection, there would be no need for Senator Farnham's proposition. But we have clearly shown, as I've said in the past, to totally ignore the will of the people and the outcome of referendums. So, once again, I say for those reasons, I will support the proposition and urge others to do so.
So now we're going to speak to Tadier.
Thank you, sir. There have been some remarkable things that have been said, all I would say, under the guise of protecting our constitution. First question, if the constitution is so important to some members, why don't they write a constitution so that we can all see it and we can present it to the public of Jersey and see, so we all understand it, we can all refer to it, and before we decide on what rules we have in order to change that constitution, which doesn't exist in written form. Perhaps that could be something that the Comité de Connétable could do. Secondly, I heard a remarkable statement from Deputy Guida, remarkable because I don't think it can possibly be true, certainly not categorically so. He said that if you can get a 2/3 majority for something in this Assembly, then that must mean that if it went to a referendum, it would also win a referendum. Is that true? Let's apply that to the House of Commons. You could probably get a 2/3 majority in the House of Commons in a free vote, certainly pre-referendum for Brexit, to remain in the EU. You'd probably get more than 2/3. You'd probably get a 3/4 or a 4/5 majority in the House of Commons to remain. But yet, if you put that to the public, you get a different result, and that's because the public and their parliaments don't mirror each other. And we like to think that we're the microcosm of wisdom in this House, in this Assembly, because we've all come here in some ways through various different routes, some through whatever system. I don't cast any aspersions on that, because once we're all here, we're all equal, even if the power that we have and the representation we have isn't equal. And there was a remarkable vote the other day where I noted it was an amendment. I can't remember offhand which one it was. And we had 10 constables who voted one way, and we had 2 constables who voted the other way. Who were those constables? So the 2 constables that voted against or for were the constables of St Helier and St Saviour. And the other 10 voted against, let's say. But yet, that's half the island, because the Constable of St Helier and the Constable of St Saviour represent half of the island. And the other 10, who today are getting to their feet in order to support this proposition, are saying, we don't want any change. So that's the basis that we have. And this amendment, which I'm sure has been lodged for the right reasons, has to be put into the current context. It wasn't lodged a year or 2 ago when we weren't necessarily talking about electoral reform. It's been lodged clearly in reaction to something to make it even harder for the much needed change that we have. And if you put the question to the public, which says, do you think that the States Assembly is constituted and composed in a democratic and fit-for-purpose sense for the 21st century, you wouldn't need to worry about a two-thirds majority because you'd probably get a 90% resounding, no, absolutely we don't. Do you think that the numbers stack up and that there is fair representation, given the example I've said that 2 constables representing half of the island can be outvoted by the 10 who represent the other half? It simply doesn't stack up. And the analogy here, don't get involved in legal questions. And I literally didn't want to speak in this debate. I know that's a cliche which is given. I genuinely don't think that this debate has the legitimacy. I wouldn't want to legitimise this debate, but I've been brought to my feet by some of the specious comments that I've heard from some speakers saying that they want to protect democracy. In fact, what they want to do is inhibit the democratic process so that we have a truly fit-for-purpose system by saying let's have a two-thirds majority. It would be bad enough if we said you have to have an absolute majority. That's what some areas do. Say you need, if there are 49 members in the Assembly, you need 25 irrespective. In fact, that's what we do, sir. We already do that. So there's an inbuilt mechanism. So in the case that there would only be 43 members, some out of the island on states business, you would still need that 25. So the arguments surely should be one on their merit. If members are so confident that they are right, why not just use the simple system which says you have to convince a majority of your peers in order to affect change? And if it's a constitutional issue, by all means put it to a referendum. But that's a completely different area. Don't fabricate these new ways and mechanisms to obfuscate progress, which is exactly, if it's not designed to do that, that is certainly the consequence of what happens. And I think the analogy is that you have a football team who is already winning the league, so that they've been winning all of their games anyway, because they have the best team, if you like. They have the numbers, they have the best pick of the bunch. You've got one team which can only have a limited scope for picking their candidates and their players. The other team gets access to all the best players and gets first pick. So they're already winning. And they said, actually, but we want to change the rules even further so that in order to beat us at this game, you need to score 4 goals, but we only need to score 2 goals. That's exactly what we're talking about today. You need to get 2/3 of the goals. We only need to score 1/3 of the goals to succeed in maintaining the status quo. And the public will be looking at this thinking, okay, there are lots of other issues that can be debated. And that's a completely weasel argument which I've heard being used and being put out there in the media, saying, aren't there other important issues to debate? Well, let's face it, there are so many important issues. Some are minor, some are major, and we have to deal with all of those things in the Assembly. It's not valid to say that one thing is more important, because people, being diverse, will have their pet projects, etc. Everything we debate here is legitimate. We decide how much time we spend to it, and frankly, we shouldn't be spending that much time debating a proposition which makes electoral reform and so-called constitutional reform so much harder to achieve. Let's stick to what is the basic democratic principles. We are here to make the decisions on behalf of people. If we can convince half of the people that in the Assembly who have been elected to represent that change is necessary, it's already difficult enough under the skewed system we have. Let's stick with that. Let's not make it any more difficult.
Can I ask a point of clarification? But I do actually want to speak, and I'm not sure if this is, is that possible? I can speak if I ask a point of clarification as well.
Well, you can ask the deputies or a previous speaker to clarify.
It wasn't, well, it sort of is the previous speaker, but it's more about the proposition before I speak. I just wanted to check that this supermajority, if passed, would be needed for the electoral reform proposals. That's the sort of constitutional thing we're talking about. I think it's important that there's clarity on that before we proceed.
The electoral reform proposals have, as I understood it, have the impact of reducing the numbers of members of the states. So that would be caught by the standing order. Deputy St Martin.
Thank you, sir. So the timing of this proposition isn't good. If it sat alone in the middle of a period of constitutional calm, where changes were not being proposed and discussions were not being held, then maybe. but I have to agree that I don't think the timing is good. Yesterday, and I still haven't really made up my mind on this one, I'm listening avidly, but yesterday somebody said something to me which caused me to stop and think, and they said, you know, when we come to important decisions, we shouldn't have approvals limping over the line. And I thought, yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, because when you come to important matters, you need decisiveness. You don't want things limping over the line. But then, of course, you sit back and think, how many actually have limped over the line? And the answer is not very many. In the same way that, dare I say it, the Prime Minister in the UK recently has struggled to find anything which commands a majority, anything at all. It seems to me that many of the debates that I've sat through and listened to have struggled to command any majority. So that when you do find one that gets over the line by a simple majority, it's usually the very rare thing. How hypocritical it would be today, actually, if this proposition itself succeeded by one vote, when it's proposing that serious changes, which it's talking about, is a 2/3 majority. I can't pretend to even begin to use colourful language or culinary language like Deputy Labby, but I'm going to agree with him. Unless somebody can persuade me otherwise between now and the vote, I'm unlikely to be supporting this proposition.
Deputy Seymour.
Thank you, sir. And I rise now, having decided to speak, and not to repeat previous points, but just to reflect further on the question I asked, because it seems to me, even though this may be a legitimate means for the proposer to proceed by seeking an amendment to subordinate legislation, I don't think it's at all appropriate, because we are talking here about serious changes, constitutional changes, if you like, which I consider should be brought forward in primary legislation if we are to treat them seriously, if this is a genuine attempt to safeguard rights and privileges. And in the primary legislation, in the way we make laws, that is subject to a scrutiny process, and ultimately that is subject to Her Majesty in Council, we need to assure Her Majesty in Council that all appropriate checks and balances have been followed, and this is a proper legislative proposition. But instead we're seeking to make this change through an amendment to standing orders, and standing orders are there to give effect to something that has already been approved in primary legislation, not to make this sort of fundamental change. The standing orders is to regulate proceedings and business within the states. But seems to me this goes far further than just regulation of proceedings and businesses. I know it may be seen as just a measure to determine a vote and what must be successful for something to succeed, but it is something that other countries enshrine in their written constitutions. And it is something that other countries submit to referendums when they wish to make such serious change. And we are proposing to make it just by an amendment to our subordinate legislation. And that just, to me, does not seem at all appropriate or a dignified way, frankly, for a legislature to proceed. And if only for that reason, I cannot support the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Any other member wish to speak? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. I was elected in a first past the post election, and I was elected. And when I stood on the doorstep and trying to speak to everybody in the parish, I didn't say that when I was in the assembly, I would need a 2/3 majority for anything that really significantly affects their lives. It was a simple majority, and I think Islanders know that. Now, 19 votes against any proposition here would end that proposition because you wouldn't have a two-thirds majority. There are 12 constables and there are 8 senators. We have to raise those numbers. And so when we talk about change to the electoral system, we are immediately setting ourselves up to ask for people to vote against themselves to have any chance of any change being made. And it's clear, regardless of whether you like the numbers or not, that we are not truly equally representative of the people of this island when we're elected because of the constitutional boundaries and the numbers being insufficient. It's been said to us so many times. It is so obvious. Anyone can work it out. And we have to do something about that. But if we adopt this proposition today, we will tie our hands and perhaps leave it so that we can never make a change to that democratic process which is so necessary, which I also believe is a catalyst to why people do not vote, because they don't believe they have a say, particularly in St Helier. And we need to change that. This is a very dangerous, I believe, a very, very dangerous proposition that seeks, I believe, that people outside this assembly will see it as one that is purely designed, and this concerns me, I hope it is not the case, sees it as something that is designed to simply hold vested interest and to avoid change. And that is a real concern, again, at a time when this assembly needs to build its credibility to the people of Jersey. And I really am concerned, and I cannot support this proposition. And I urge you not to support this proposition for exactly those reasons. And you know, I've got to say, it's difficult enough to change minds in this assembly. I do feel sometimes you can win the argument but lose the vote very frequently because of all sorts of reasons. But if that's going to happen, that you need to win the argument and you need to win the vote by a supermajority as well, it really does make you think, and you know, looking in the eye of the electorate to say, yeah, of course I can represent, of course I can make change. Of course. No, I'm not so sure that we're going to be able to do that. And we need to avoid this. If the argument is good enough, it will get a large majority anyway. We do not need to write this into our statute or whatever it's called. I think it's dangerous. I think it's counterproductive. Thank you.
Call on the Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I do have difficulty with this proposition in the sense that whatever the outcome, I do not think it's going to bring about an ideal result. I have sympathy with the argument put forward by Senator Farnham that if the proposition did limp over the line, to use someone's phraseology, if any proposition limped over the line, that could result in a situation which was not in accordance with the wishes of the electorate at large. Senator Farnham has referred to the position of the reduction of the number of senators. The electorate were not considered at that stage. I believe that if they had been, they would not have approved that. As against that, we appear to be missing the fact that constitutional matters should have the approval of the people as a whole. The Deputy St One has quite rightly referred to the fact that, again, as mentioned in the report accompanying the proposition, other jurisdictions require that any such changes are the subject of a referendum. I think that has to be the way forward. My own ideal solution would be that to leave matters as they are. If it did slip through, that is not a catastrophe in the sense that approval would need to be ratified by the referendum as a whole, and if they did not, it would not proceed. And that, I think, is the result we should be aiming for. For the moment, and I wait to hear what anyone else might say, and the Minister in his summing up, I am not inclined to support it on the basis that if a proposition did come forward as to constitutional change, I would maybe vote against it unless I was convinced that it would be followed by a referendum. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Truscott.
There are many countries around the world that protect their constitution with a supermajority voting system. The USA, Canada, Denmark, India, Japan, Estonia, Spain, and the Canary Islands are just a few examples. And many countries demand a referendum if there is only a simple majority vote in place. So, for example, the consent of the Irish people is needed before their constitution can be amended. Up to the year 2018, 35 Irish constitutional referendums had been held, of which 29 resulted in amendments to their constitution. So, sir, I ask, why is this the case? Why should there be extra protection? Well, it's the thought that the supermajorities in the legislature are often required for constitutional amendments because of the belief that constitutions should not be amended without careful deliberation. Personally, I was amazed to see that we did not have in place within our standing order such a mechanism. If the need for change is generally agreed, it should be easy to achieve a supermajority. However, with a major change, and we have some that are coming through this Assembly over the coming months and years, with long-lasting effects, let me start again. However, when a major change with long-lasting effects is highly contentious, supermajority requirements help ensure that such steps are taken only when it's clear that most members really want to take that step. For me, sir, this proposition is about providing quality assurance for the voting public of Jersey. I, for one, are happy to consider change. No organisation should stand still. However, something like constitutional change shouldn't, in my opinion, just limp over the line. You probably found out now who's been speaking to Deputy Luce, potentially by one vote. A well-presented, considered and deliberated upon proposal should sail past the finish line. I totally agree. And ideally achieve 35 plus votes. A resounding supermajority result to any proposals regarding change to our constitution would demonstrate and affirm to the people of Jersey that the overwhelming consensus had been achieved in this Assembly. So members, for the right change, and I really emphasise the right change, I urge you to support this proposition. There's a couple of things I would like to pick up on, and just as I was listening to my Honourable Deputy Insabrella, Deputy Teddier, and I do hope he is, whatever happens this morning, because he mentioned ask the people. Yes, we do need to ask the people whether it's by referendum or not, because what's coming forward is changing. I'll start here. That we were elected on the basis of 29 members, deputies, 8 senators and 12 constables. That is the contract that we have with the people. Now, some would argue we've been given the power, it's a great honour. Have we been given the power to change that contract? They've put us in power. For me, it's all about principle. It's about honour. It's about if you are going to change something like this, then at least ask the people. They've given you the mandate. They've asked you to go and act on their behalf and make important decisions. But if you're going to change the rules for how we're elected, then at least you should ask them and seek their permission to do so. I think to do otherwise, I think it's elitist. I think it's wrong. I'm a person of open and transparency, and I will, just for the record, I did have a small input on this proposition, some as you may be aware of, but that's all it's been. The senator has brought this proposition, it's in his name. No, as I say, we've got some major changes, 800 years of dedication and office serving Jersey, and it's got to be by majority, as far as I'm concerned. It just affirms that the right decision, in my opinion, has been made. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you, sir.
Propose the adjournment, please.
Adjournment's proposed. Very well. States now stand adjourned until 2:15 this afternoon.